Awesome. Welcome, everybody. And everybody who's seated here in Bartos Theater and everybody who's out there watching the webcast. Welcome to the Federal Communication Commission's workshop on innovation, investment, and the open internet. My name is Sharon Gillette. I'm the chief of the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau. And together with my colleague, Paul Dessau, who is chief of the FCC's Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, we'll be moderating this workshop today together. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Meredith Attwell-Baker. Thank you. It's a pleasure for all of us, but especially for me, to be back here in Cambridge today. And we have an incredible lineup of participants today, and we're really looking forward to your participation and your questions. To kick things off, the chairman of the FCC, Julius Janikowski, will be giving us some welcoming remarks. Bet you didn't know, but here goes.
Welcome to this FCC staff workshop. This workshop is on the open internet and innovation and investment. Thank you so much to the staff of the FCC for organizing this, and I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Baker, who I appreciate has decided to come and be part of this staff workshop in person in Boston. There's no place better to hold this particular workshop than Cambridge, than Boston, than this university. There's no place in the country that had more of an influence on the development of the internet than Cambridge and Boston and MIT. You'll hear the story today, I'm sure, about the development of the ARPANET right very close to where you're sitting. You'll also hear about how a couple of months ago the Commission launched a proceeding on preserving a free and open internet. The focus and the key question is how to preserve an internet that generates innovation, investment, job creation, and economic growth. It's obviously critically important to the country that we do that, especially at this time. This will be an essential part of our platform for opportunity in the 21st century. The internet is an important part of that, and proceedings like this are critical to making sure that the Commission tackles these questions in the right way and gets the right answers at the end of the day. It's important as we think about the future of the internet to make sure that our goal is to optimize overall investment and innovation around the internet. That's true both in the core networks over which the internet rides. They need to be robust and more intelligent every day. And of course, we need to spark innovation and investment at the edge of the network. I'd like to hear the proceedings today address the question of how we optimize overall innovation and investment throughout the core and the edge of the network. Let's talk about how to grow this pie bigger so that the internet can play the critical role it can in our future in promoting innovation and investment for our country. The process that we have been holding in connection with this has been an open process. Participation has been an essential element of how we think we can get to the right answers. That's why I'm so pleased that we have such a distinguished group of participants today: innovators, investors, entrepreneurs, scholars, members of critical standard-setting organizations. Thank you all for participating, for taking the time. Thanks to all of you who are participating remotely, using the internet. If you're seeing this, you're probably at openinternet.gov, where you can participate in this proceeding by sending questions on the website right now. These kinds of open, robust proceedings is how we're most likely to get to the best answers for the country on important issues like these. So I thank all of you participating in Cambridge and MIT right now, remotely on the internet. Thank you again, and I look forward to hearing about what I think will be a terrific day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now my pleasure to welcome and introduce Commissioner Baker, who I get to thank in person for coming today.
Thanks, Sharon, and good afternoon to everybody. I really just want to welcome everyone to this hearing. I want to thank everyone that's participating. We have a great group of people who are very esteemed here. And I really want to thank the team that's put this together. It's no easy feat to put something like this together, and we're really grateful for your time and effort, so thank you. Nothing that we do at the Commission is more important than engaging in careful and thoughtful consideration of how any of our regulatory decisions that we make affect innovation and investment. And in this case, innovation and investment in the internet and the broadband networks that make the internet possible. As we begin today, I think that it's, in all fairness, that I should say that I'm still unconvinced that there is a problem that we should be addressing at the Commission, and I would not want anything to interfere with the successful deployment of the broadband future. Our country and our economy so urgently needs this. But that is why I'm here. I'm here to learn. I'm here to hear from the policy experts. I'm here to hear from the people who are designing and building these networks. I'm here from those who are operating the networks and those that are going to power our next generation of broadband infrastructures. Having said that, I am particularly pleased that the Commission, especially under Chairman Janikowski, any great, under his leadership has decided to implement a very thorough and a transparent and a fact-driven process to encourage broad participation in this proceeding and really to develop an ample record so that if we make a decision, if any, as we move forward, that it will be fact-based. I'm here to listen and I'm here to learn, and I really want to thank everyone, and I look forward to all of your insights on these issues, and issues are, I consider they're really critical for the future of the internet ecosystem, broadband for all Americans, and for our nation's economy.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner Baker. We were going to have Lynn Senamore, but she's unfortunately horribly sick. But instead, it's a pleasure to introduce Sally Shipman-Wentworth, who's the Regional Bureau Manager for North America for the Internet Society. As most of you probably know, the Internet Society, or ISOC, is one of the leading Internet standard-setting organizations, and it was founded in 1992 to ensure the open development, evolution, and use of the Internet. It's the organizational home for the Internet Engineering Task Force and also the Internet Architecture Board, which are responsible for setting the infrastructure standards for the Internet. Sally, who kindly came to join us today at short notice, prior to joining the Internet Society, she was the Assistant Director for Telecom and Information Policy at the White House, and she was responsible there for government-wide coordination and implementation of policies related to Internet governance, telecom policy, privacy, and other information technology policies. From 1999 to 2007, Ms. Wentworth was the Principal Policy Advisor on Internet policy issues at the State Department, where she was responsible for building coalitions amongst developed and developing countries and Internet stakeholders on all kinds of Internet public policy issues. So, Sally, would you like to come and... I don't... When you...
Thank you for a very kind introduction, and thank you for having us here today. I'd just like to personally pass on our apologies from Ms. Saint-Amour, who couldn't join us today. I'm very pleased to be here today, and on behalf of the Internet Society, I appreciate the opportunity to help set the stage for this workshop. In particular, we are very happy to see that the FCC is reaching out even more broadly to involve the Internet community. The Internet Society was founded in 1992 by Internet pioneers Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn as a global not-for-profit organization dedicated to ensuring the open development and use of the Internet for the benefit of people throughout the world. As a global community with over 28,000 individual members, 100 organizational members, and chapters in more than 90 countries, we address issues at the intersection of technology, policy, and development. The Internet Society is also the organizational home for the Internet Architecture Board, the IAB, and the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, which is the premier standards body for the Internet. The topics embodied in the title of this workshop, innovation, investment, and the open Internet, as well as the important dependencies amongst them, are critical to the future of the Internet and central to the Internet Society's mission. Of course, the Internet of today is very different from when the Internet Society was founded over 18 years ago. The World Wide Web was in its infancy. There was no Twitter or Flickr, no Facebook, and companies such as Google and Skype didn't yet exist. The infrastructure was very different in size and capability as well. In the course of less than 2 decades, the reach of the Internet has grown nearly 1,000-fold and today connects more than 1.5 billion people. What has remained constant about the Internet and what is at the heart of its growth and what distinguishes the Internet from other technologies and communications networks is its continued innovation and evolution. Its amazing success has only been possible because of its development model that's built on openness, transparency, decentralization, and its distributed nature. Because the Internet is an open platform, users, network engineers, and businesses of all sizes can innovate both with regard to the platform itself, the Internet, and in how that platform is used. Everyone can participate in its development. This distributed, open, and transparent approach has come to be called the Internet model of development. Now, some have suggested that the openness of the Internet is somehow in conflict with innovation and investment. This often plays itself out in polarizing discussions that set at odds the interest of network operators and content providers. On the one hand, too much openness, it is said, will diminish investment in infrastructure by network operators, thereby stifling innovation and the expansion of Internet connectivity. On the other hand, discrimination of Internet traffic, it is said, will prevent content providers and individuals from developing new services and using the Internet as they wish. The Internet Society takes a different view. We do not believe that openness is a zero-sum game. For example, following the recent Comcast BitTorrent dispute, which involved peer-to-peer application traffic, the companies engaged in an open Internet standards process at the Internet Engineering Task Force to build better technology to address the heart of their problems going forward. 2 new working groups were created within the IETF following long-established protocols. The LEDBAT working group is standardizing a congestion control mechanism for peer-to-peer applications, and the ALTO working group is developing a protocol to inform applications about network characteristics and topology. That work has stimulated even further work as network operators and content providers use the open IETF processes to engineer longer-term approaches to refining congestion management in the global Internet, that is, beyond the reach of their own networks and services. In this way, open participation and collective development efforts leads to broader opportunities for innovation and development than would be possible through narrow or closed private efforts. The result of this process is that the knowledge and skills of many companies, as well as the broader Internet community, can be brought to bear upon a specific challenge. We all stand to benefit for the more robust Internet architecture that will result from this kind of engagement. The fact that the Internet remains open to ongoing evolution in its development, operation, management, and use means that the opportunities for context-shifting innovation and creativity still abound today. Innovators are not locked into a centrally predetermined future. Instead, they have the freedom to create multiple possibilities, with success or failure dependent upon whether or not they are taken up by users. Similarly, policy should not be written in terms of today's technologies or applications or around narrow assumptions about how bandwidth is managed. Just as the ability to engage and benefit from a broad range of ideas has been the hallmark of what has made the Internet so successful, it is also true for Internet policy. Looking at the diversity of the panelists here, I think this workshop is a good example of the multi-stakeholder approach to tackling a difficult issue in the marketplace. So I commend the FCC for engaging in such an open process and for seeking out a wide range of viewpoints. This workshop is being webcast, so it is important to note that governments, businesses, and Internet users in other countries are keeping a close eye on how these issues are addressed in the U.S. While the Internet reaches 1.5 billion people today, it will reach billions more in the next few years. The ability of those people to contribute to the Internet's continued evolution will shape its future. In closing, the Internet is an extraordinary platform for innovation and has developed from broad participation in both the use and development of Internet technology, services, and applications. The Internet's openness has been critical to its past success and is the key to continued innovation and investment. With that, I'd like to thank the FCC for inviting us, and we're looking forward to listening to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. Sorry, the script says Lynn. Sorry. Thank you so much, Sally. We really appreciate it. And thank you not only to ISAC for the important role that you play in standard setting, but also for the World Wide Web Consortium, which will be represented on our panel today by Tim Berners-Lee, which also does critical standard setting work that helps ensure that the Internet continues to thrive. As you know, this workshop is part of the FCC's Open Internet proceeding that is meant to preserve and promote the features of the Internet that have spurred so much innovation and investment. So our objective today is really to zero in on this question: what is it about the Internet that has promoted so much innovation and investment? And we're hoping to do that by hearing from leading academics, innovators, and investors in this space. The workshop participants and you, the audience, will help us figure out the answer to this question and to identify how the relevant features of the Internet have affected who innovates, the pace of innovation, and the type of innovation and investment that occurs. The discussion at this workshop will become part of the public record that the Commission will draw on in the rulemaking process. And I also just want to put in a small plug that next Tuesday, January 19th at 1:30 p.m., the FCC will host another workshop that will focus on transparency, or what information consumers and technology developers need to know to promote consumer choice and user control of the online experience. It will be held in D.C. in the Commission meeting room. It will also be streamed live on openinternet.gov. That's http://www.openinternet.gov. Let me say a few words just about how we're structured today, and then I'd like to pass it on to our very esteemed panel. We will begin today with 4 framing presentations from leading scholars, engineers, and entrepreneurs who will frame and introduce the issues from their diverse perspectives. And then we're going to move on to 2 different panels of discussants that features an all-star lineup of innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, network operators, equipment vendors, and experts in Internet innovation and investment. And during the discussion panels, we will also take questions from you, the audience members, and that includes those online. And there are 2 ways. Actually, I see there are 3 ways here that you can submit your questions. One is you can write them down on cards that are available in the back of the room and will be passed around periodically. Over there, I can't quite see, but she's got them. So we will pass around those cards, and you can submit your questions that way. If you are either on the webcast or you are, hopefully you're not sitting here with your laptop open and reading your email, but there is Wi-Fi connectivity here. Hopefully we're so fascinating you would never want to do that. There is Wi-Fi connectivity here, and you can email questions to newmedia@fcc.gov. I'll say it again, newmedia, N-E-W, media, @fcc.gov, or you can post your comments and questions via Twitter with the hashtag OIBOS. And also, if you're offsite and you want to follow along with the agenda at openinternet.gov, you can find the agenda and also bios of all the participants. Thank you so much, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. Our first presentation, I think we're going to go down the panel this way, is from Professor Barbara Van Schuik, who's Assistant Professor of Law at Stanford Law School. Barbara's research explores how changes in the architecture of computer networks affect the economic environment for innovation and competition on the Internet, and also how the law should react to those changes. This work has made Barbara a leading expert on the issue of net neutrality, which she will speak on today. Barbara's also a computer scientist by training and an Assistant Professor of Electrical Engineering at Stanford too. So Barbara, please.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm here today to talk about the factors which made the enormous amount of application innovation possible that we have seen. And I'll do this through 3 stories. Here's the first. In the mid-90s, a software engineer in Silicon Valley named Pierre Armédia thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could buy and sell stuff online? We could use auction to determine the price. Most of his friends thought he was crazy. Strangers will never buy online from strangers, they said. But Pierre Armédia didn't care about that. On Labor Day 1995, he stayed home, developed his software, and put it online. 9 months later, so many people were using the platform that he decided to quit his day job and focus on it full time. The platform, renamed eBay, became a huge success, and today more than 88 million people worldwide are using eBay to sell or buy things over the Internet. 3 aspects are important here. First, Pierre Armédia had an idea for an application. People thought it was crazy, but it didn't matter. In particular, it didn't matter whether network providers believed that strangers would ever buy online from strangers. And that's because on the internet, network providers don't have to do anything to enable new applications to run. This is a consequence of the internet's architecture. The original internet was based on a design principle called the end-to-end arguments. This design principle was first described by Jerome Seltzer, David Reed, and David Clark, who are both here today. Following this design principle, the network was designed to be as general as possible in order to support a wide variety of applications with different needs. So when a new application comes along, the network doesn't have to be changed to allow the application to run. All the innovator has to do is write a program that runs on a computer attached to the internet. As a result, an innovator doesn't have to convince network providers that her application is useful or will be commercially successful. The only person who needs to be convinced that this is a good idea is the innovator herself. This greatly increases the chance that innovative ideas will be realized. Second, when the application has written, the network does not need to be changed before the application can run on the network. If you want to use it, you install it on your computer. That's it. The only person who needs to be convinced that this application may be useful is the person who actually wants to use it. This greatly increases the chance that people can actually use the new application. Third, in this architecture, it doesn't cost a lot to develop new applications. You need access to a computer, be able to program, and time to actually write the program. This greatly increases the number and type of people who can develop new applications. Like Pierre Armédia, you don't have to be an employee of a firm or have outside funding to realize your innovative idea. Because the biggest investment is often the design or programming of the application itself, innovators can develop an application in their free time or as a side project. Under these conditions, an application does not have to produce a profit in the future to cover the costs of developing it. Instead, a wide range of benefits may be sufficient to cover the development costs. Thus, the architecture allows innovators with a wide range of motivations and funding models to develop new applications. So, there are three aspects. Innovators independently decide whether to realize innovative ideas. They don't need support or permission from network providers in order to innovate. Users independently decide which applications they want to use. And the low costs of application innovation enable a very large and diverse group of people to develop new applications. That was the first story. Here's the second. In 2002, two European entrepreneurs named Niklas Sandström and Janus Friis thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could use peer-to-peer technology to make phone calls over the internet? At the time, most network engineers didn't think this was possible. They thought that internet telephony would require special treatment from the network, something we call quality of service. Network providers weren't really interested in the technology because it was a huge threat to their business model. But Sandström and Friis didn't care about all this. They went ahead, developed their software. The software became Skype, and today more than 500 million people worldwide are using Skype to place phone calls over the internet. Again, we have two entrepreneurs who had an innovative idea for an application. Network engineers didn't think it would work, but it didn't matter. That's similar to the eBay story. But there is something new here. The application constituted a huge threat to network providers' business models. But it didn't matter. And for Sandström and Friis, it didn't matter because there was nothing network providers could do about it. And there was nothing they could do about it because the internet's architecture prevented network providers from interfering with the applications and content on their networks. As I said, the internet was based on the end-to-end arguments. As a consequence of this design, the network can't distinguish between different applications and content. It was application blind, and as a result, network providers couldn't control the applications and content on their network. Today, that's different. Today, sophisticated technology is available that allows network providers to identify the applications and content on their network and control their execution. Thus, the original internet was application blind. Today's internet is not. Does it matter? Imagine you have this great idea for a video platform that will revolutionize the way people watch TV. Once they have used your application, they will never go back to cable again. Of course, there are risks. The technology may not work. Users may not like your application. Your business model may be wrong. But in the application-blind network, you know that you will get a fair chance in the marketplace. You will be able to compete with other net applications on the merits. In today's network, cable providers may squash you. The network can turn against you anytime and block your application or slow it down. There are many reasons why network providers may do so. Maybe your application competes with theirs. Maybe they just want a share of your profits. Maybe they don't like your content, or your application is slowed down to manage bandwidth. Whatever the network provider's reason, if your application gets blocked, your project fails, and you won't be able to reap its benefits. And accounting for this possibility, you or potential investors may decide not to pursue your idea. Third story. When YouTube came on the market, it competed with Google Video. YouTube was better. It won. In today's internet, things might have been different. In an application-aware network, the network provider can ask applications to pay an access fee. There are many ways in which it could do so, and all of them would be bad for innovation. Let's focus on one possibility. When YouTube came on the market, network providers might have said, Google, you are big. You have lots of money. Why didn't you give us some of this money, and we will give Google Video better transport? So imagine Google pays. Suddenly, Google Video is so much better. Not because it's the better product, but because Google is rich and Google was able to strike a deal. In such a world, network providers get to decide who is successful by deciding who gets a deal. Suddenly, network providers, not users, get to pick winners and losers on the internet. 3 stories, different factors. How do changes in these factors affect the amount of and type of application innovation? Some changes may affect the costs and benefits of innovation. An innovator decides to innovate if the benefits, broadly defined, are larger than the costs. Increase the costs or reduce the expected benefits, for example, through access charges or discrimination, and some innovations may not be justified anymore. Some changes may affect the size or diversity of the innovator pool. Others may let network providers, not users, choose which applications will be successful and how the network can be used. For example, access charges may reduce the profits for all affected application developers, but they may hit certain types of application developers, for example, those with no or little outside funding, particularly hard. Why are these things important? If there is uncertainty, for example, about technology or user needs, or if user needs are very heterogeneous, a larger and more diverse group of innovators will produce more and better applications than a smaller, less diverse group of innovators. And these innovations will better meet user needs. What's the intuition here? If there is uncertainty, nobody really knows in advance which applications will work or which applications will be successful. Under these circumstances, economic theory suggests that it's best to try out many different ideas and see what happens. Some will succeed, some will fail, but trying is the only way to find out. And because different people will have different ideas and different views of the world, more and more diverse people will have more and more diverse ideas. Tim Berners-Lee looked at the internet and saw a giant web of shared information. Pierre Omidyar saw an online marketplace, and Jeff Bezos saw an online bookstore. A larger and more diverse group of potential innovators will also realize more of the ideas that are known. For example, startups may have an incentive to realize ideas that established firms may not want to pursue. Or users may have an incentive to create applications that manufacturers wouldn't want to produce. By contrast, fewer innovators or less diverse innovators will try fewer things, leaving valuable ideas on the table. But widespread experimentation is only part of the story. The second is, who gets to decide which applications become successful? Users or network providers? Does it make a difference? I argue it does, because users and network providers will choose different applications. There are two reasons for this. First, users and network providers use different criteria when choosing which applications will be successful. Users choose the applications that best meet their needs. That's easy. Network providers may use different criteria. Does this application compete with my own application? Does it create a lot of bandwidth? Does my preferred network management vendor offer software that happens to block this application? Consider Skype. Many mobile providers in Europe do not allow their users to use Skype over the mobile internet. If you look at user forums, you will see that users don't like this. They want to use Skype on their cell phones. But if users use Skype, the network providers say they don't make as many traditional cell phone calls, and voice revenue shrinks. So network providers make a decision that's very different from the one that users would have made. And second, even in those cases where network providers would like to give users the applications that they want, they don't necessarily know what that is. That's the uncertainty I talked about earlier. In many cases, nobody knows whether an application will be successful until users actually try it. Network providers cannot replace this. Beyond innovation, user choice is also important if we want the internet to provide the maximum value for society. But that's another story. Thus, if network providers pick winners and losers on the internet, if they decide how users can use the network, users may end up with applications that they would not have chosen and may be forced to use the internet in a way that does not create the value it could. In sum, there are a number of aspects that foster application innovation. Innovators independently choose which applications they want to pursue. Users independently choose which applications they want to use. The application blindness of the network ensures that the network provider cannot interfere with these choices, that it cannot distort competition among applications or reduce application developers' profits through access charges. Finally, the low cost of innovation not only make many more applications worth pursuing, they also allow a large and diverse group of people to become innovators, which in turn increases the overall amount and quality of innovation. But why do we care so much about application innovation? Why should policymakers care about that? I have a longer answer to this question that explains how application innovation contributes to economic growth and how application innovation creates value for society in all areas of our life. But my time is almost up. Therefore, let me just say this. Did you ever try to explain to your partner's grandmother why she should get the internet? I did. Although I'm a computer scientist, I didn't say, "Oh, Grandma, you have to get the internet. It's so cool. It sends data packets back and forth." No. I said, if you get the internet, you can call us and see your grandchildren on a screen. And if we have new pictures, you can see them right after we send them. And you can read about everything that you could possibly imagine. Thus, the internet does not create value through its existence alone. It creates value by enabling us to do the things we want to do things that we never knew we wanted to do, or do things more efficiently. Applications are the tools that let us realize this value. in all areas of society. And by protecting the factors that have fostered application innovation in the past, we can make sure that the internet will be even more useful and valuable in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Barbara, thank you very much. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Shane Greenstein. Shane is the Eleanor and Wendell Hobbs Professor of Management and Strategy at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. He's a leading researcher in economics of computing, communications, and internet infrastructure. And he has a blog which is called, for I'm sure some good reason, The Virulent Word of Mouse.
Last time I did one of these, there were 10 people in the audience, and 9 of them were FCC employees. This is quite different. Anyway, how you doing? It's nice to be here. I'm going to, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. Thank the FCC for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to do a review of some of my writing on the evolution of the internet. I'm an economist by training, and I suspect in this audience I'm going to be mostly an economic historian. And we'll just go from there. The question before us is, how has openness facilitated innovation? My starting point is that open has many meanings depending on the audience. The meaning I'm going to use today, there are different meanings one can use. I'm going to use one throughout this talk. I'm going to stress communication between different partners in a technically interdependent value chain. I'm going to talk like an economist too, by the way, so just get used to it. And by that I mean I'm going to be particularly interested in understanding the transactions costs of setting up innovative applications. By that I mean the cost of setting up a new series of protocols or processes to create value, or the cost of executing those. And in particular, I want to focus on the role of transparency and consistency in lowering those transactions costs, and in so doing, supporting a wide participation in innovative activity. Now, making that case, I'm really not supporting any specific policy proposal, although certainly what I'm going to say is going to have implications for some specific proposals, and we can get into it if you want to. Okay, so let me start as an economic historian. When you look at the internet today, it looks very different than the way it looked 20 years ago. I think that's a given. I'd even say it looks different than the way it looked when commercial boom first began in the mid-90s. And two things about that legacy matter for the talk I'll give today. First, when I refer to the internet, I refer to more than merely technology. I'm referring to the internet industry. So when I mean internet, I mean things, not only just tools and apps, but also the supporting infrastructure and the businesses built to operate them, as well as the functions that use them. The second thing is it really does matter where this came from. The legacy here, the origins of the internet are one of what an economic historian would call an archetype of collective invention. It was a process where improvements and experiments and findings were regularly shared. That was part of the ethos of what brought about the internet. And that has some importance because that's how you start. It starts with that. And it becomes something different when it commercializes, and that's producing a lot of the tension we see today. So if I look today and I ask what is most different over those 20 years, I identify two things. First thing is the rise of platforms. Platforms were already in the computer industry, so this is not a particularly new thing for commercial computing. But for the internet, it was new. And in particular, I mean a reconfigurable base of compatible components, usually readily identified with hardware, software. It doesn't have to be proprietary, but it often is. You know them when they're offered by Microsoft, Intel, Google, Cisco, SAP, Oracle, Apple, and so on. And when I look at the internet today, I see a network of platforms. Because, by the way, that's the way the firms think about it. And it's tethered together by a set of standards as well as shared interests. The second thing that's changed is the emergence of concentrated provision of broadband. I'm going to focus on broadband and not the wireless side, just to keep things focused and simple. Simple enough. It's hard even just to do this. And what you see there, again, I won't belabor the point, it's a small set of suppliers above certain speeds in most mass markets. And that usually raises a traditional concern about pricing. I'm going to actually focus on a different concern, mostly today. That is the role that's a concentration or market power, as an economist would say, the role that might play in shaping the transactions costs of others in the value chain. So when I think about transactions costs, a couple things come to mind. First one is this notion of transparency. What do I mean by that? I mean that two things, actually. Transparency is two ways. One, participant makes an active attempt to inform others about what they're doing. The second thing is participants can learn what others are doing without restriction, and then use the information without restriction, sorry. Today we're actually in a situation that's quite different than the origins of the internet. Originally, it was quite transparent in both senses and both directions, and that's not so today. The firms involved inherited a set of norms, and from commercial computing, generally it does not support two-way transparency. And we can ask the question whether that's good or bad, or what results that has, and we'll get to that. The second thing I'd introduce to the conversation is something I'd call consistency. That is, whether the processes and policies for major firms change slowly at most. And it's just the question that most small firms who interact with large firms tend to ask, which is are all firms being treated the same way, and is there variation across segments or across time? Why does transparency and consistency matter? They matter because the business partners with these large platform providers worry about their investments and their innovative activity and what returns they're going to get over a time horizon. And they don't like lack of transparency or inconsistency because it opens the opportunity for opportunistic pricing to them or renegotiation or costly renegotiation. And that affects their ability, small firms' ability to capture value. There's an additional thing that happens in a network, which is somewhat different than what you see in other parts of the entrepreneurial part of the US, and that's that because it's a network as well, there's the additional issue that developing apps has to work on multiple ISPs. So if multiple carriers are inconsistent regularly and also non-transparent, it also opens up the possibility that each small application has to work with multiple different norms. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, so we get the last point, which is how you think through the consequences of those two things for participation and innovation. Well, you can have wide participation or not, or narrow participation. Participation is costly to support, and there's where you get the interesting economic questions. It is for a large firm, it's costly to notify a lot of other firms about what they're doing. It's also costly to give up some strategic control over the direction of information, and it also slows them down to talk to others. They gain something, certainly, by having wide conversations. That is, they get additional information and a variety of opinions. But then when you think about what large commercial firms are doing today and what the platform firms are doing today, particularly the proprietary ones, you want to ask the question, do they have incentives to be as transparent and consistent in their actions as the industry would prefer they would be? So I would conjecture that in a competitive setting, by and large, we don't worry about such matters because if a firm takes actions that hurts them or hurts their business partners leave and their users leave. In a setting with market power, however, we do actually have to worry about it, and this question, and the reason we worry about it is because we would conjecture that a firm with market power, such as a carrier, a broadband carrier with market power, would have some incentive to be transparent and consistent. However, the benefit that their transparency and consistency would generate for lots of other application firms is much larger than the benefits that they themselves see. And so the conjecture you would make is that their incentives to be transparent and consistent are quite weak, or at least to do it in a way that supports wide participation in innovative activity. The last thing I'd introduce to the conversation is concerns about negotiation or renegotiation. We live in a world, or we live in I happen to believe we still live in an internet economy that's subject to a lot of change, that has not matured yet, that will continue to evolve for the rest of my life, I hope. And consequently, because those opportunities are before all the firms here, it's almost a given that because they're interdependent and the opportunities are changing, that they will have to renegotiate their terms with one another again, and frequently. And then, from a policy standpoint, you want to ask the question, do the powerful firms negotiate with other less powerful firms in ways that are disadvantaged to their innovative behavior? And again, I'm just going to take a very standard economic approach. If you think about that question, the two things you really worry about are take it or leave it offers or refusal to deal. That is, deliberate attempts by powerful firms not to even come to deal with anybody. Those are the things you worry about. And what conclusion would you come to? Again, in the presence of competition, you would not worry about such matters, generally. Firms would be, large firms, proprietary platform firms included, would be punished by their business partners as well as by their users for non-transparent or lack of consistency that somehow hurt them. On the other hand, in the presence of market power, you would conjecture that firms would hide behind the lack of transparency and consistency and potentially renegotiate or take negotiating stands that aren't in the interests of of the wider group of participants in the internet and the wide breadth of innovation that we'd like to see in our society. And so, so you come to this conclusion that you would worry about the commercial norm for lack of transparency and lack of consistency among proprietary platform firms as well as firms with market power in settings with lots of entrepreneurs, as we presently have in the internet and we would like to see. And since entrepreneurs continue to be a source of innovation, we would also want to worry about these issues going forward. So I'll end with one story. I think it's a familiar story, I'm guessing, for most people in this audience. That's the events concerning Comcast and BitTorrent. I'm just going to use it as an example, as a canary in a coal mine on these issues, because I don't think we're done with them yet. So the story itself, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm presuming most of you know it, but let me at least go through a couple pieces of it. I want to start with some sympathy for Comcast. They had good reason to take action, and their actions were motivated by a desire to increase the experience for their own users and to manage that experience in a way that they thought was going to be in the interest of their user community. At least on the surface, that's the way it looks to me. And yet, despite that, when you look at what happens, the thing I find most striking about their behavior is that the actions they took did not happen in the presence of a company-wide policy, or at least the person who took the actions was not educated in such policies, that reflect anything that looked like transparency or consistency. They changed what they were doing, they didn't tell anyone, and then they took the actions, and they didn't even tell their own users. Now, there are a number of reasons they could have been doing that, but I just want to raise the question. That example raises the broader policy issue: what happens when all the broadband ISPs look less transparent and consistent and don't notify the rest of the application community or even their own users about how they're changing things? And the argument I'm making is that that raises transactions costs for innovation. And raising those transactions costs will necessarily lead to a decline in the breadth of participation and potentially the extent of innovation we observed. Okay, so now let me get into a summary. I included this slide just because I knew Dave Clark was in the audience. And now Dave knows the joke. This is a picture of rough consensus and running code. Okay. Oh, sorry, that's an in-joke, in case you don't know. All right. Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, okay, so you didn't get it. All right, it's fine. Yeah. But yeah. So, what were the summary of the themes here? If I have a thesis, I'll state it precisely. It's wide participation in innovative activities encouraged by transparency and consistency. That's because lower transactions costs increases the range of participation in interdependent value chains. And the concern one would raise for policy is the incentives of broadband firms with market power and platform vendors to be transparent and consistent. And if the commercial internet necessitates some active role for management by carriers, which I suspect it does, then the question I'm trying to raise is, and place attention to, is what implication does this way of looking at the world have for unrestrained discretion of carriers. And I would say, it leads me to be comparatively sympathetic to calls for the antiseptic of the bright light of transparency. So that's where I'm headed. Thanks for your attention. And if you wanted to see writing that supports this, the first two are by me and on my webpage, and the third one is another piece by a couple other authors that I'm also quoting here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Shane. Our next speaker is Dr. Marcus Weldon, who's the corporate CTO at Alcatel-Lucent and also a member of Bell Labs. Marcus, in this position, is responsible for coordinating the technical strategy across Alcatel-Lucent and also driving innovations to their technology portfolio. Marcus?
In the spirit of openness, can I get up and be open? And
you're welcome to.
Whatever you like.
If you want to storm the podium, you're welcome to.
I can use this one, I think, right?
Totally. I cede my place.
I'll try not to get in the way. The reason I want to be up here is I want to point to things, and it's just better to move around. So, thank you. I'm the CTO of Alcatel-Lucent. That's the Chief Technology Officer. And what does Alcatel-Lucent do? Probably some of you know we sell DSL equipment and we sell fiber-to-the-home equipment. So if you're on a DSL connection in North America or a Fios for Verizon, that's us. If you have Verizon Wireless or AT&T Wireless, then that's us. If you're in Canada and down here on a day trip, that's us too. That's Bell Canada or TELUS or SaskTel. So we sell a lot of stuff. It's access equipment, optical equipment, routers. But frankly, I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm actually also in Bell Labs, and that's the interesting part. Because for those of you who know Bell Labs, it's a fairly esteemed institution, industrial research institution. We just won our 7th Nobel Prize, which is not bad, in 50 years. So, and guess what it was for? It was for the CCD, the detector in every, basically, cell phone that takes an image, any digital camera, any detector of a video image. So we've also won Nobel Prizes for the quantum Hall effect, which is pure physics. So that tells you the flavor of Bell Labs. It's actually kind of academic-y, pragmatic-y research. And that actually is important for my talk because it's going to have kind of an academic flavor with some mathematical analysis, but it's also going to have the pragmatics of how a network really works. So that's what we're going to do today. All right, so I'm going to give you, I can't help myself, I draw pictures of networks, and so you're going to have to look at this one. But I'm going to explain it. So first of all, the open internet, what actually is it? Right? It's a good question. Everyone thinks it's this thing, but actually even I had to think about what does it look like today. So here it is. It's a collection, the simply written, and this has already been said, it's interconnected private managed IP networks and public networks that connect together through transit links and peering links. So it's a mishmash of stuff, is what that really says. And look how mishmashy it is. So here's your network provider. These would be your AT&Ts, Verizons, etc. They're here. They're also up here, by the way, in that they peer with each other and have backbone links. And in between, you actually have other things that also peer with those guys. And peering is basically how you connect pieces together in a certain way. So Google and Amazon, for example, have networks of data centers now. So they have part of the internet. And that peers with the network providers. And then you have companies like Akamai that make large, what are called content networks, where you have caches connected together with links. And that's another part of the network. And you see that they basically all connect together either by direct peering, where two of them cooperate, or they all mesh together. And one way you can mesh together is using called an internet exchange point, of which are about 20 globally, really big ones. So you see, that's the rough network architecture. Now, why have I bothered telling you this? Because it's going to be relevant to how services get delivered. But now let's go on with my definition. Open. It's open. Remember, we had the internet defined as this thing. The openness is because any user can connect to any application on the open internet, and that's already been defined. So that's nice, and it's a very favorable property. Next, the open internet actually supports this best effort approach. You've heard about best effort. It sounds good, and it is good. It allows all users roughly the same treatment. But in fact, when you look a little bit deeper, it doesn't do that at all, because in fact, if users are clever, or if they buy a higher level service tier, they get much more than other users. Just to give it a simple example, TCP, a protocol you've heard about, if I open more TCP connections between my application and my client, I get more bandwidth than you do. So I was cleverer than you, and I got more bandwidth. Or I pay my network provider for a higher bandwidth tier, and I get more bandwidth that way. So depending on which network you're connected to, which applications you're running, it's only an approximation at equal behavior. It tries to be equal, but it doesn't actually often succeed. Next, the on-ramps to the internet. Now, the on-ramps are the thing that you pay for, really. That's your access charge, where you actually attach to a network provider, Verizon, AT&T, Quest, etc. And so those really are the on-ramps to the rest of the internet, because I'm going to say the internet really is somewhere out here where applications reside that don't necessarily reside in the operator network. But those on-ramps also have managed services in them. And why am I going to mention that? Because it's important to understand how best effort and managed services interplay. And the last part is basically a restatement of some of the point about openness and that not all things are created equal on the internet. Because I've already mentioned that CDNs exist. A CDN exists to accelerate some applications to the detriment of others. If a web page that is cached gets faster access by users than one that isn't. And that applies to lots of different things. Data centers owned by Google and YouTube also accelerate the delivery of that application relative to others. And these are all things that go on today. And I've mentioned the service tiers. So you can see the internet's open, but not really equanimitable. It's kind of equanimitable. It tries to be. So let's move on from that. Next, I'm going to show you how some services get delivered. And then you have this is the last network diagram, so the pain will stop soon. Best effort services, typically delivered from a web server. Remember I said, so it's going to be somewhere out here, to a client somewhere here, over the open internet with no special treatment. That's a best effort service. A managed service is typically delivered from a web server. It just so happens that web server sits in the operator network and gets delivered to your same client just over what I would call the managed IP part of the network. So here's the managed part of the network. Here's kind of the open internet part of the network. But that's basically the only difference between a managed service and a best effort service. And I'm going to show you that, in fact, hybrids of these things exist too today. So let's look at some services. Here we go. There's web browsing. It's simple. Your client attaches to an application server, and here's my code. Dashed line is best effort. Solid line is some kind of guaranteed QoS. So web serving typically looks like that. Next, here's Internet VoIP. That's Skype. So as correctly pointed out, it's a kind of peer-to-peer service, so it doesn't really have a server in the network. It actually does to do some setup stuff, but after you've set up the call, it's really you talking to your neighbor, which is what's shown here, and best effort. Now, I would point out, we spend quite a bit of time talking in Bell Labs to people like Skype. And Skype actually claims that 50% of their calls are video calls. That's actually one of their popular services. And the problem is they just can't get the QoS they would like for that service. So in fact, everyone is only so-so about the Skype video service. Despite it being used because it's free, they would much rather have access to some way to enhance that service. So in fact, although it's best effort, there is a pressure, even from application providers, to get access to some of that QoS that's going to be associated with the managed services. Next, let's look at another application. Oh, here's operator voice over IP. You see, the only real difference is it just stays within one network. It doesn't go out into another network. And it does involve an application server here. Typically, operators have application servers because they allow you to do more sophisticated things like three-way calling and conferencing. And generally, for that, you need an application server. But you see, it kind of looks the same. Now, this one's an interesting one because here's my hybrid. This is internet video. It's YouTube, for the sake of argument. So it's coming from somewhere in Google. And you see that it gets delivered over what is called a transit network through a peering connection. Now I'm claiming, in this case, it goes to Akamai. Unlikely to happen in reality, of course, because they're not the best of allies. But let's say it goes to Akamai. Then from Akamai, of course, Akamai peers with network operators, so Akamai can deliver that piece of content actually with some kind of quality of service. Because it didn't source it from way back here, it sourced it from here. So now why I've drawn a solid line is that is actually what you would consider kind of an internet service. It's open. I could access it from anywhere. But it actually got delivered with a kind of quality of service. And it did so because, in that case, YouTube paid Akamai for that privilege. I'm not advocating that's the model. I'm just saying that that's the reality of today. And then last, here's IPTV from an operator. It looks the same. The difference is the content started within the operator network and got delivered to you with quality of service. And last, here's a VPN. Virtual private network. Again, it's a quality of service kind of enhanced service offered between two enterprises. So I think you're beginning to get the flavor that there really isn't just one type of thing, one best effort service. There are best effort services. there are operator services, and there are hybrids, and they all exist today. And why I've belabored this is because I'm going to propose that actually more of that is even better. So at the end of my talk, the more diverse array of applications we can develop and put the user in charge of choosing which ones of those get developed by saying, I want this, give me this, then that's the best way to proceed. So a lot of stuff on here, but you've heard many of the points, so I'm going to actually just highlight the most important. Open means any access to any app from any user. This is the whole table basically says, if I invest in content applications, how am I helped by these things? And I'm hampered by these things. So you want to do more of these and less of these. And this is the same question, but for network infrastructure. So to invest in network infrastructure, I'll be helped by these things, and I'll be hindered by these things. So you can read it, all the detail. But I will focus on the key ones. Openness is absolutely key. I'm not going to argue against openness. But it has to be affordable as well. And if we look at the hampering, we can't have bandwidth limitations. Because if we have bandwidth limitations, we have congestion. If we have congestion, then what happens? The quality of service goes down. Now, if I'm a network infrastructure provider, I've got to be able to afford to provide that bandwidth, and that's what it basically says over here. I'm going to not invest in my network infrastructure if the cost of the network is too high. So I need to have a reasonable attempt to, I need to have an affordable network infrastructure. And one thing that's implied here is I need a way to have revenue so that I can afford to pay the cost of the network, so I can provide open services without bandwidth limitations with the quality of service. So that's the kind of shape I would draw across this chart, and you can read the rest of the detail. But I'm going to make this point now graphically. The key point is open's good, but it has to have the ability to afford the bandwidth, and you have to now account for quality of service. Because the old internet of web surfing is not the internet of today. That's why content networks have arisen, is they're solving a quality of service problem. That's why data centers have arisen where applications are run more locally than on the original web server. So I'm going to show you how we can actually solve this problem. But first of all, let's look at something very important. I said cost of networks is key. But let's look at this. How can we quantify the cost of a network? First of all, we have to start with the cost, with how much bandwidth do we need. So here is the bandwidth curve. This is actually for mobile networks, worldwide projected traffic growth over the period 2008 to 2013, and we're already here, and it's actually already looking like we're here. So this is fairly reliable. 131% compound annual growth rate, doubling every year, basically. And look at that. That's phenomenal or exponential growth. So what's the issue? The issue is this. Revenues aren't growing like that. And that's problematic. But you really have to ask a question here. This is misleading. The ones who are following this will say, well, hang on a minute, what if bandwidth's really cheap, right? If bandwidth's really cheap, then I don't care that traffic's growing a lot because I've got exponentially declining network costs. So the world is still hunky-dory. So that's the analysis we've done. So back to the Bell Labs thing, we independently looked at this problem and said, is bandwidth infinitely cheap? So offsetting this growth, I've got a declining cost of a network, and so limited revenue growth is okay. And here are the results. This is for a wireline network or a fixed network. Here's the network cost per subscriber for that sort of bandwidth growth on a wireline network, so a fixed network. And here's the revenue per subscriber. You see, this is the beginning of the problem. Here you've got profitable growth, and here you've got extreme lack of profitability because your cost actually is crossing over where your revenue is. And this is somewhere out in 2012, 2013. Let's look at the wireless case. Here's the wireless case because this is that much more aggressive growth curve. And you see the network cost per subscriber going up here, revenue per subscriber flat, and you've moved again from the realm of profitable growth to unprofitable growth. So why should we feel sorry for a network operator? And I'm going to show you that, in fact, this is bad for everyone. It's certainly bad for the network operator. But if the network operator goes out of business, that's really bad for everyone. But also, this actually will hamper innovation. So the point I'm going to make on my very last slide is that the coupling of providing good best effort services with revenue-generating services is the ideal configuration of a network in terms of maximum social good or maximum utility. So this is my last slide. Here we go. And that shows the problem could be much worse. Because actually what I used here was a conservative bandwidth growth assumption based on actually fairly conservative traffic assumptions. So here we go. This is the proposal. That you actually allow the user to decide that they should have unlimited access to quality-enhanced services just for those services that they value. So they say, for example, let's take Skype. I'm a Skype user, and I want quality of service. Why shouldn't I be allowed it? So you simply are allowed to ask for quality of service for Skype. For that, you're charged a small fee, because, of course, that is some enhanced service. In return for that, though, you increase the revenue of the network provider in that case. And remember, this is user requested. This is not Skype saying to operator, give me quality of service. This is user saying, I really value Skype, give me quality of service. Enhance the revenue, enhances the capacity investment. It's simple. Network operators generally invest 15 to 20% of their revenue in their CapEx. You give them more revenue, they invest more in the network. So that increases the capacity investment. Then the experience gets better. Now, the question is, does it get better just for the people who order the premium service, or does it get better for the best effort internet users? And that's what the charts over here are going to show you. But assume, for the sake of argument, it gets better for both. Then applications get developed more in a more dramatic and in entrepreneurial way, because people are happier with applications, which again gets back up to here, where users now want more of those applications. They want premium treatment for some of them, and we keep going round and round. So let's look at the supporting evidence. Again, this is back to Bell Labs, analyzing this problem on our behalf. And what it says is, let's assume we have these things called managed services. And in my paradigm, they're actually requested by the user. Okay? But that's, in the economic model, somewhat irrelevant. So they're requested by the user, and we also have best effort services. If you look here, look what happens to the overall network capacity if I allow for that paradigm. If I only offered best effort services, here's my capacity growth over time. If I offered managed services, the overall network capacity goes up for the two services, because there's revenue. There's more revenue, so they invest more in the network. But that could just be in the managed services category, again, making the operator rich and everyone else suffering. But that is not actually what happens. What if you look at just the best effort network? What happens to the best effort network when I invest more in my network? And this is what happens here. Here's the best effort only service, it's blue. When I actually invest in the network more, both the managed services and the best effort network benefit, because this is just the best effort network capacity now, and you see it's actually gone up as well. So in the paradigm way offer these types of services, even the best effort service gets improved by a significant amount. In fact, we can show it actually is constantly increasing, and this cycle of innovation, and virtuous cycle, if you want to call it, is continuous. And you can actually find many answers where this is not the case. If in any way you clamp this problem and bound it artificially, you can find that actually you stifle the amount of growth of the network, and you go back to a limited best effort network that's congested, and you don't allow the maximum degree of innovation and growth in the network over time. So that's my basic point. I hope it's been interesting. The idea is open's good. User-driven is good, innovation is good, but the way to solve this problem and still allow the network to grow in an unfettered, unbounded way is to allow for categories of service where the user can actually request the service they want to be QoS enhanced, as well as the best effort service that they're happy with. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker is Jeff Gluck. Jeff is the leader of Skyfire, which is a startup using cloud computing technology to develop faster, more capable, rich media internet browsing on mobile phones. Prior to Skyfire, Jeff was CMO at Travelocity for 7 years, and he's been named one of 13 customer champions by One-to-One magazine, and was also profiled in the book Online Marketing Heroes. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you. All right, can you hear me? So I'm grateful to be invited to share this perspective of an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur both on the old-fashioned internet, starting a company in the late 1990s, and now as an application developer for the mobile web. So I've had a chance to see how to build a startup from a small company on an e-commerce, traditional internet side, and seeing the contrast to the relatively more closed mobile internet that we face today, and I'll speak to that contrast. So quick background on Skyfire. I'm not here to talk about Skyfire, but simply as a case study of the kind of company that Barbara was talking about that is trying to do something that people told us couldn't be done. And it's a business model that has tremendous value to consumers, but threatens entrenched interests. So it's a cloud computing web browser for your mobile phone, and it was built to solve a problem, which is that for most people, browsing on a mobile phone isn't as good as browsing on your desktop. I think most people would agree. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Even on a heralded phone like the iPhone, it's just, you often want to wait till you get back to your laptop to do things. Videos don't often work. Browsing can be very slow. Some pages don't load right. It's just much harder to browse on the internet. Lots of content out there isn't accessible. For instance, 80% of video is Flash on the internet today. Video is the zing of Web 2.0, and yet Flash doesn't work on any mobile phone today. So Skyfire was a group of entrepreneurs who thought, we can do some boosting of the power of these mobile phones through cloud computing processing, and we'll enable a phone that doesn't have the power, battery, the bandwidth, the processing power, the memory of your standard laptop or desktop computer to have a powerful server in the cloud that will enable it to do anything that an ordinary computer can do, which is why we launched last year, after 3 years of tech development, $23 million invested by Silicon Valley venture capitalists, and we won a Webby for Best Mobile Application last year. Millions of people have downloaded this application, and it enables you to go to any website. Generally, the pages load in 5 seconds. We're on Windows Mobile and Nokia phones. And you get the desktop internet. Flash works, video works in seconds, everything works. And you get the full internet on your mobile phone. Now, what's wonderful about this actually for network operators as well is that we compress the internet by 70 to 80%. And so we save bandwidth. You use creative software to actually lessen the load on the network by pre-processing the internet and delivering it faster. So that's just a case study of an innovative company. We were told, like some of the folks that Barbara talked about, that this wasn't doable, that it would be too expensive to operate cloud computing centers for each user. And we've refined the technology, and it now costs us a handful of pennies a year to operate it per user. And that was something we were told couldn't be done. So now, I founded a company called Site 59 in 1999 that did last-minute deals on the internet, and in 2 years we went to about $130 million in sales. Just a handful of us starting this company, and like Barbara's entrepreneurs, we were a group from outside the travel industry. People told us it couldn't be done. But fortunately, we didn't have to go before a committee at Expedia or Travelocity and convince them that it was OK to launch a service. We didn't even have to convince any internet operators. We just built technology, launched a website, and again, within 2 years, we had over $130 million in sales. Travelocity bought the company, and it became Travelocity Last Minute Deals, if you've ever used it. So the larger theoretical point, now that I'm a mobile application entrepreneur, is I think about the features that made us want to start a company in 1999. And I used to work for a professor named Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, so I must admit subconsciously I probably borrowed from his diamond framework in terms of the shape of this graph. But it was attractive to invest years of our life working 140 hours a week because there was a big market out there on the internet. It was interoperable. You could build one website, and it would work on Dell computers, and back then Gateway computers, and Acer computers, and Apple computers, and the like. Browsers enabled interoperability. We just could build one site, tweak it for different browsers, and it worked to reach that mass 100 million plus audience. There were low barriers to entry. We didn't have to be approved to get into the marketplace. And there was adequate infrastructure. We knew that the photos of the hotels that we were showing could get through the network, the wired network. So now I'm going to talk about my experience as a mobile entrepreneur and how different it is on a closed network like the mobile internet. So compared to the regular internet, there are a number of difficulties innovating on the mobile internet. And I think it raises interesting questions for the question of the open internet and net neutrality that should be discussed, and the extension of those principles to the emerging mobile internet, which may be far more common. 1.5 billion internet users, but there are 4 billion cell phones in the world. And so many more people in the future will access the internet more often from their phones. The internet will be in their pocket, and increasingly phones are little computers that you happen to have in your coat pocket. And yet the norms haven't caught up with that reality, that these are little computers in your coat pocket. So first, the freedom for consumers to choose their own applications and defaults. One of the principles that the FCC had enshrined is that if you own your computer, you should be able to choose applications to install and run on it. That doesn't actually happen today, this isn't theoretical, on the mobile internet. There's a lot of uncertainty as an entrepreneur about whether you can access an app store. Again, we're talking generally, but there are certainly some very popular app stores which require a sort of inscrutable process to be approved. We have not yet built Skyfire for iPhone, for instance. It would cost us several $1 million in investment, and it's rather daunting as a CEO to think about taking that risk if some faceless individual within an app store management committee could just say no. And this isn't theoretical. One of our competitors, a company called Opera, that hundreds of millions of people use around the world, has been blocked from the App Store. They're very clear, for instance, Apple, that you can't have duplicate functionality on your phone. So imagine if Dell said to you, your computer comes with Internet Explorer, so you can't put Google Chrome or let's say, Firefox on your computer. Well, that would be outrageous. We had the Netscape DOJ case, of course, a decade ago. But that is exactly what happens now on many mobile phone systems. No duplicate functionality means you have to use the browser that comes with the phone. That's the rule. That seems to me at some tension with the principle that if you own the device, you should be able to install the applications that you want. Further and deeper, some platforms allow the user to set a default. So they can choose, I want this browser to be used. Android is like that, Windows Mobile, and others. Again, there are certain platforms out there that never allow you to change the default software on your device. So that seems a threat both to innovation and to competition and new entrants. Consumers as well, well, I think that largely covers it. I mean, essentially, if you aren't sure you're going to be able to access the market, you don't invest. If you aren't able to introduce new things that disrupt the status quo, your ability to change and innovate and move forward is lessened. And I would remind folks that small business is the majority of jobs in America. It is the majority of net job creation. In fact, it's almost entirely all the net job creation. And those big companies we talked about frequently here, Skype or Amazon or eBay or Google or Facebook, all started as tiny startups. It was essential that they had access to the marketplace and they weren't blocked before they had a chance to prove their merits. Secondly, there's a lack of transparency on network management and a lack of open access to the common protocols on the web. So this is not theoretical. We live with this every day at our company, which has 40 employees, and we have to put months of man-hours into figuring out what's going on. Ports are often blocked by carriers arbitrarily without notice. Can you imagine trying to write an application if some computers you couldn't use the USB port, others you couldn't use a serial port, others you couldn't use an Ethernet connection, and it all changed without warning? It would be very hard, but that is exactly what happens today to us around the world and within the US as ports are blocked. Often for well-intentioned reasons. It may be that a carrier detects that some spammer has been using a given port and decides, well, we'll deal with that by just blocking that port for everyone. But there have to be better ways to implement security. Obviously, some carriers do it without blocking ports. At the very least, there should be some kind of transparency and notice. Another example is carriers often decide to throttle certain kinds of traffic arbitrarily and without notice. So most famously, most mobile video is delivered through what's called RTSP, real-time streaming protocol. It is frequently slowed down because it's easily identifiable and there's enormous growth in video traffic. And an easy step to do is just find that that traffic takes 2 minutes to get through instead of seconds or milliseconds. This is very common practice. It's not disclosed. And it forces us to make all kinds of somersaults to use and find other alternate protocols. In response to this throttling, we developed our own TCP-based protocol that's even faster, which is why we can start videos like YouTube videos or NBC videos on your phone in seconds. But then certain networks now are precluding any protocol but their preferred protocol. So December 14th, for instance, Apple announced that any video app had to use HTTP streaming. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed in the App Store. There's nothing wrong with HTTP streaming. We just don't happen to build our application that way. We're going to have to rebuild our application to get on to the iPhone. But there are several other legitimate and widely used protocols, and they work on the iPhone. Apple just decided this protocol is the only one that will be used to access the network. It's very slow. It often takes 30 seconds to start a video using this protocol. We've invented a better protocol that starts videos in seconds. We're not allowed to use it. So this would be an example of a choke point on access to the marketplace for new ideas. Thirdly, there's a lot of uncertainty about non-discriminatory and adequate data throughput. I agree with much of what the gentleman from Alcatel-Lucent said about the explosive growth. I 100% agree, and I'm about to show a slide that agrees with him entirely. That said, I'm rather horrified by the prospect of a world in which there would be a menu of pay more for Skype. Because think of the complexity. There are millions of websites and millions of entrepreneurs. You think 500 channels is bad. Imagine 7 tiers on millions of different sites. I mean, it would be impossible to administer for small entrants. Who would get favored on a limited menu? The big guys with millions of dollars would get prioritized access. It would be highly anti-competitive, and the big giants would have easy access to the top of the menu. So I believe that non-discrimination should be the hallmark of network management. It is a fact that we have a data bandwidth problem, especially on the mobile web. But it is also true that a few users are far and away abusive users, and there can be non-discriminatory ways to have a professional edition and a consumer version. It'll still feel like, for any normal user, it'll still feel like unlimited use. Most of the bandwidth hogs are people often doing unlawful transfer of adult or pirated content. The idea of the open internet doesn't say that unlawful content should get equal treatment. But instead, the idea is that useful applications that might threaten powerful business models should get equal treatment if they're lawful. That's an important distinction, and I think Shane talked about the power of abuse. We need network management, but the power for abuse is enormous. That's why the hallmark of non-discrimination against lawful applications and services is so important to innovation and job creation. Lastly, I would say it is very concerning as a small business, that map that you were shown of the internet. It's fine that people pay CDNs to install cache versions of software closer. That speeds up the internet. That's wonderful. It's fair and open. Anyone can go buy CDN services. What concerns me is the talk of carriers allowing the biggest players to come in and co-locate their servers for free or a small fee inside the internet hosts. That opportunity, if it's not equally afforded on similar business terms to small entrants, means in that YouTube versus Google video example, YouTube never gets a chance, because they don't have equal access to that co-location. I'm not opposed to steps like this to better manage bandwidth across the full internet, but it should be equally open to small business as to big on equal terms. So those are my 3 points. It's very different. I'll wrap up in the last minute. I've sort of coined a term we use in-house that mobile warming is underway. It's an inconvenient truth. If you look at data Q209, the growth in HTTP streaming, which is one premier form of video transfer, was 60% quarter over quarter. 60% quarter over quarter. And this is before Flash, which Adobe says might ship later this year in native form, even hits the market. This is all optimized mobile video because nothing else plays on mobile phones. When web video, including HD video, is suddenly enabled, this is going to exponentially explode. Imagine trying to download an HD Hulu video to play natively on your phone. It's not going to play, but you'll take down the cell tower nearest you. So this is a very inconvenient truth, and I think all the points that Alcatel-Lucent made are accurate. We need to deal with it. Browsers and browser compression are very important. Competition in this is critical. Apple is phenomenal, but it's 2% of world cell phones. Browsers are key to allowing small entrants to play. So competition in browsers is something that the government should have particular interest in ensuring, because they are the gateway to this interoperability. If you build an app that's great to reach 55 million Apple users, but it doesn't reach the 4 billion cell phone users, browsers can. And so I'll finish up, and this is my last slide. There is no long-term trade-off between applications and networks. We need each other. We create the need for that data ARPU by excellent applications and fun things. So we need each other. But the proper way to manage the network is either through stamping out hogs using illegal content or tiered pricing that's non-discriminatory. But arbitrary management of the network just opens up anti-competitive practices. So as an entrepreneur and someone who's got venture capital backing, I really think that a compelling reason exists for jobs and innovation for there to be an open internet, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and to all our panelists. We're now going to turn to our first discussion panel. Could our panelists please come up? Where our format is going to be that we're going to have 5 minutes for each discussant. We'll have 4 of them. And then that will be followed by 30 minutes for a Q&A, a short break, and then our second panel. And it's my pleasure to introduce... Okay. We're going to go slightly out of order. Pardon me? It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Clark, who since the mid-1970s has been a senior research scientist at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, and has been leading the development of the Internet. From 1981 to 1989, he acted as chief protocol architect in this development and chaired the Internet Activities Board. Recent activities include extensions to the Internet to support real-time traffic, explicit allocation of service, pricing, and related economic issues, policy issues surrounding local loop deployment, and the architecture of the Internet in the post-PC era. David? Thank you.
You want to do it one introduction, one talk?
Yes, we'll do one at a time, and please take your 5 minutes.
That'll give Tim a chance to sit down. So I'm actually going to behave like a respondent, which is to say my comments are going to try to follow from what people have said here. And let me begin by saying that at a high level I agree with the points that people have made. I'm going to maybe go down a level and talk about some nuances. And in doing so, I don't mean to disagree, but perhaps to elaborate. So let me pick up on some points that the previous speakers have made. As Sharon said, I've been interested in quality of service for a long time. I've been interested in quality of service since the mid-1990s. I think that quality of service is a pro-innovation feature in the sense that it allows different applications to work in ways that meet their needs. And when you've talked to people doing games and VoIP on one hand and saying they'd like to control latency, and you look at the development of LEDBAT, which allows certain applications in some sense to step out of the way. If you listen to them, they say, well, we think that stepping out of the way improves the acceptance of our products in the market. I think it's hard to argue that QoS is definitionally anti-innovation. I would make 2 points about it, and one of them is I think QoS raises the possibility of enhanced innovation, but it also raises fear. It raises fears that we've given a tool to people who are going to use it for abusive reasons. And we could drill down into that, but I only have 5 minutes. I guess what I would say is I think it's not time for fear to dominate hope. The second point I'd like to make in response to something that Barbara said is that the way we designed QoS, it was intentionally designed so that it can be application blind. If you look at the header of the packet today, there's one set of bits there, the port that's traditionally used to indicate what application you're running. There's an entirely different set of bits which allow you to specify what QoS you want. And at one point in the early design process, people said, well, why are we just use one set of bits and then the ISP can assign the right quality of service to the application? And several of us pushed back very hard and said, no, the user should be able to pick the quality of service of the application they care about, so it's got to be 2 sets of bits. That's drilling down a level and talking about the way a nuance can differ, can cause some variation in the way things work. Second thing I want to pick up on is Shane's point about consistency. If you look at the internet today, you don't find QoS running in the public internet. If you did find it, you might find it running in one part rather than another part, and that would in fact represent a peculiar inconsistency. I think that a topic that hasn't received as much attention as it should in all these debates is the problem of interconnection. And let me be very clear, since I said the dirty word, I am not encouraging the FCC to regulate ISP interconnection. I think that would be a flaming disaster if you look at the range of bargaining that's going on today. But if you ask, well, what would it take, for example, for quality of service to be available in a consistent way across the internet, the answer is ISPs have to figure out how to negotiate to interconnect it. And today they feel tremendous barriers to that, barriers that look like antitrust, and I have to negotiate with my competitor. This is an area where I would encourage not regulation, but facilitation. It's not a traditional role of the internet, but in a world where you have so many opportunities for regulatory escape, like going overseas and running your servers in some other country, I think facilitation is a more positive role than regulation. I do think you have to look at all the actors when you talk about these policies. You have to look not just once at an ISP and then later at the consumer. You have to look at all the actors. And you have to understand that it is a balancing act. You're trying to facilitate the ability of all these people to innovate, to invest. So many of your decisions are going to be balancing acts, and that means there are going to be very few absolutes in this space. The internet is not absolutely neutral. The internet is not absolutely open. And the internet is not absolutely being built for the benefit of the internet service providers. I was very encouraged by the cost models that we saw from Alcatel-Lucent, because what we saw is cost of network operation was running around 10 or maybe running up to $15 a day, and the average consumer is paying 35. And by 12, 15 perhaps it was, that curve might have gone up to 35. And what that says to me is, wow, that means when the triple play is over and I'm paying for my internet and all of the costs of the ISPs are being paid for by my internet bill, it's going to go up $20 a month. And you know something? That's great. Now, if you'd said $200 a month, I'd say, ugh. But if it goes up by $20 a month, in exchange I'm not buying cable anymore, I'm paying the content. That's great. So I was really encouraged by those curves. But you should expect the costs are going to go up when the triple play dies, right? So get over it. Okay. You got to pay. The money's got to come from somewhere. The last thing I'll mention in 13 seconds is the thing that leads to consistency and abilities for individuals to innovate is, in fact, having architectural frameworks within which pieces can be fit. And if you don't have an architectural framework, then, in fact, there are innovations you just can't do. So facilitation across actors to give you common frameworks in which then individual pieces can be put in, which is the sort of thing that in the past has been done through the IETF, but less so now. It's hard to talk about overarching designs there. This has to come from somewhere if, in fact, we're going to facilitate other kinds of innovation. I've run out of time.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Tim Berners-Lee, who in 1999, and I get to say this with a totally straight face, invented the World Wide Web. While at CERN, he really did. While at CERN, the European Particle Physics Lab, he wrote the first web client and server in 1990. He designed HTTP and HTML, no small accomplishments. He's the director of the World Wide Web Consortium here in Cambridge, a web standards organization founded in 1994 that develops interoperable technologies, specifications, guidelines, software, and tools to lead the web to its full potential. I think we've all been beneficiaries of their work. He's also the 3Com Founders Professor of Engineering in the School of Engineering here at MIT. Thank you, Tim.
Suppose I've come to this from more than one place. From the innovation point of view, yes, okay, I invented the web 20 years ago, and it was really nice that I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. It was great that I could go out and write a piece of code. I wrote a server and a client and run them on the same machine, in fact, initially, and then different machines. And I used, before I got port 80 for HTTP, I used my parents' phone number as the port number, and didn't have to ask John Postel or anybody. So that was great, and that was really important. But their phone number was a 4-digit number. It was more than 512. I didn't have to. I didn't. I got port 80. So since then, for the last 15 years, I've been director of the Web Consortium. So the World Wide Web Consortium has been where people meet to develop web technology. So there's been the web. The web was an innovation on top of the internet, but then for the last 15 years, I've been concerned of it being a platform on top of which people innovate. And so the fact that HTTP also doesn't really mind what you're doing on it has been very important. And you see things, all these things, like eBay, which have happened on top without being designed for a specific application or to work for a specific company. So I've spoken out generally as at the web level. I like the internet just to exist and just to be very neutral then I've spoken out a few times publicly when I've been concerned. For example, about packets being discrimination in the delivery of packets. Discrimination because somebody is trying to affect the way I buy my shoes because they're delivering packets to a particular shoe store faster because that shoe store has ended up paid them money. Or pay them money even to not deliver so many packets to the shoe store I really wanted to use in the first place. Shoe store, I'm even concerned that if we don't have very clean rules about network neutrality, non-discrimination, that people could use discrimination as a hugely powerful tool to be able to, for example, control which religious sites you get to, or whether you get to see things about evolution, or which political site you get to, and so on. I've also got involved and said things which are out there on the web and video and text about concerns about both governments and companies snooping on what people do. I don't think people have ever realized how different this sort of snooping when you snoop on someone's internet life is compared to what any other form of snooping has ever been possible. You know, the internet is such an intimate medium, and you do such intimate things over it. My feeling is, so I look at all this as a user, so I let other people, I know it's really difficult, but I let other people worry about how exactly to do the peering and how to build all these systems so that it works. I'm happy to pay more money to be able to do voice over my IP. I would like to just be able to do voice plugged into any old IP socket. I don't want to have to pay money I don't want to pay money for Skype. Okay, I want voice over IP. I want to be able to use whatever piece of equipment, like Vonage box, to plug into it, buy that from anywhere, and I would like to be able to choose, if I get a phone number or some connection to the rest of the old Playmore telephone system, I want to be able to choose separately where I get that from. There's a separate option for when where I buy my internet connectivity in my home. Yes, in my internet connectivity at home, I just recently, I never had the I've just got rid of the TV. I never had the home phone, so I'm just one of those IP persons, and I get to I do lots of stuff over IP and it's so even without quality of service, I find I can do lots of fun things, and that's really important. And maybe it's going to be more in the end the neutrality of the web as the thing and the internet as the basis for the way I go out and learn things, the way I go and figure out whether or not I'm going to come out as a gay person, or whether I've got cancer, all these really important things, and whether the way I decide how to vote. This is so important to the way the world works that I think that these things may be more important than saving 10% on of the cost for me on it. I'm happy yet to pay that extra $20 if I can get if it will assure me that I can use the fast internet and it will be neutral. So, in conclusion, I think that I've benefited very much from the internet as it originally seemed to be. That you didn't have to ask anybody to go and put new applications on it. I think you have to ask yourself what happens when somebody starts to use a new port and the routers out there don't have time to get reprogrammed, and we don't want to get them reprogrammed. I think that I know that the internet that I've used, there's been very little regulation, but I know that the internet, when it started, it was done through a lot of goodwill and a lot of ethos, which is under a lot of pressure now. I know that there are lots of systems which seem to run themselves, but actually, when you think about it, like the market economy, it runs itself. Just the government doesn't have to intervene, but the government does have to stop you printing money. Printing money is out, because that really messes up the system. There are some times when you have to have some rules, and they're very simple rules. May they always be simple, okay? But there's sometimes when you actually have to make them, because they're so essential to the way the thing works, that it's really important we stick with them. So there are times when we may need regulation if we can't do it, but if we can't assure it without it.
Thanks, Tim. I guess I'm disappointed to hear that printing money's out. That's
Do you want to print money?
well, I think it's out for everybody, but perhaps the Federal Treasury. So, all right. Our next speaker is Susie Kim Riley, who is founder and chief technical officer of Camient, a Boston area company that helps broadband service providers to manage their networks. And Ms. Riley has worked on the early development of routing technology, network processors, and now works on a range of network policy products with a focus on quality of service. Susie?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes I'm told to tone it down, so thank you very much. Again, Susie Kim Riley from Camient. We are also a venture-backed company, Matrix, Northbridge, and Pilot House, all local Boston firms. We started about 6 years ago, and the whole goal of the company is to provide operators with the ability to actually provide quality of service for their managed services. And so we are deployed with many operators worldwide who use our products to be able to roll out applications such as voice and video over their infrastructure. So similar to the kinds of things that Marcus was talking about. So I think that, on hearing all of this, a couple of things really strike me is I really do agree with Barbara in that, the openness is very critical. I think that the ability to actually try new applications, try a lot of different things, and put it out on the internet and see what sticks. I think that has enabled the internet to become very successful. So I think continued openness is critical. And I think that what has enabled a lot of these applications to really take off is the investment that the operators have made in their network infrastructure. And so actually this is in support of Marcus' presentation, which shows this virtuous circle. So there are all these applications, and the operators have invested in their networks to enable subscribers access, really good access to a variety of applications. Because if they actually go and provide a service that blocks many of these applications, then they will lose subscribers. The subscribers will go elsewhere. They also roll these networks out to be really robust and good because they also want to be able to roll out compelling applications such as interactive media, video conferencing, as well as video streaming to lots of IP devices. And by doing this, they were able to actually collapse some of their network infrastructure because many of these operators would typically have siloed infrastructure, one for voice, one for video, one for internet. And by collapsing all of this onto the internet platform, they were able to actually deliver these services more cost effectively to the consumer and give consumers more choice for video providers as well as voice providers. And so that's all good. And basically, because they invested in this network, again, it benefited the internet innovation and lots of different applications that leverage the internet. I think that in terms of the openness and transparency, I think that many of us agree that we need the openness and transparency because I think people need to know how their service is being provided, what their service exactly is, and whether certain things are blocked or not, and what the behavior would be during network congestion and how they might be affected based on their usage. But there's an aspect of net neutrality that has actually dampened, what we view to be very innovative type of services and applications. And that part is this sort of non-discrimination. And, non-discrimination basically means no QoS. You cannot apply quality of service to certain applications. And Marcus talked about managed services, and right now, yes, there is a separate category called managed services, which would, potentially provide provisions for operators to actually be able to apply quality of service for video and their voice services. Because, from a consumer standpoint, you don't really care whether your service is being offered over a circuit switch telephony or a dedicated QAM RF-based video infrastructure, or whether it's coming over the internet. You just expect it to work well and perform. So if you actually removed or prohibited operators from being able to apply quality of service for some of these applications, all of a sudden the unintended consequence would be you would have lousy video quality, you would have lousy voice services. But some of the applications that we've been talking to some operators about that we're actually doing in Europe, because in Europe, basically they're going ahead, and there is no net neutrality in Europe. With differentiated applications and services where a subscriber could actually pick and choose which applications they want to be differentiated, QoS enabled, and which applications they potentially don't care about, so they don't mind being blocked, and as a result, they actually pay a lower fee. So in Europe, these types of services are starting to actually roll out. And in the US, we had similar discussions with customers about being able to offer these types of services where a subscriber could actually say, you know what, I want voice traffic prioritized, and I never do peer-to-peer, so, potentially block my peer-to-peer. And and those types of services, I think, are very innovative. It gives consumers lots of choices, and it also gives the consumer the ability to have a very differentiated application. I mean, if your preference is gaming, right, and if you really value gaming and you don't do certain other things, why would you not be allowed to actually prioritize gaming applications? So these are some of these things that people have talked about wanting to do, but the specter of the non-discrimination aspect of net neutrality really has kind of had a dampening effect on taking advantage of these technologies. So my perspective is that application innovation and network innovation are not mutually exclusive. I really think that if you were to work together, if application providers and network providers were to work together, you could do some truly compelling things, be able to offer high-definition streaming video to different devices. But there needs to be some sort of an economic reason and incentive for doing it, because operators cannot keep on adding capacity for the same price. That just doesn't work. The economics just doesn't work. So I think there does need to be some sort of a model to be able to support it. And again, my big concern is with some of the non-discriminatory aspects of net neutrality, you could prohibit these types of services and applications from even being tried out in the marketplace. And in other countries where such applications are getting deployed, they would be farther ahead on the innovation curve, and I think that would be a shame for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Our next speaker has graciously agreed as Aaron Ahola from Akamai Technologies. He's Vice President and Deputy General Counsel there. He's graciously agreed to fill in for Paul Sagan, who, due to circumstances beyond his control, unfortunately couldn't be with us today. But we're very fortunate to have Aaron with us. He joined Akamai in 2000, and his responsibility for helping oversee Akamai's transactional, intellectual property, litigation, and public policy matters has given him a unique perspective into Akamai's significant internet investment and innovation over the past decade. Prior to Akamai, Mr. Ahola worked as a corporate transactional attorney for law firms in Boston and New York, focusing primarily on private equity investment and mergers and acquisitions. Aaron?
Hello? Okay, great. So I want to start by apologizing on behalf of Paul, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, due to illness. So I'm going to try to do my best to fill his shoes, but maybe a little out of my league with this esteemed panel. I want to start by applauding the Commission for kind of focusing on the issue generally of the open internet. I think we concur with a lot of the views that have been expressed here, that I think one of the great things about the internet that is really that we've seen from our perspective with our customers really helped along the explosion of growth is that openness and that common platform, open standards type of thing that has really allowed things to take off. I want to spend just a couple minutes to kind of give you the quick story of Akamai, who we are, what we do, because I think that will kind of shed some light on some of this. Akamai is the leader. We refer to ourselves as a leader in powering video, dynamic transactions, and enterprise applications online. We're often referred to as a content or applications delivery network, or CDN, as you've heard a few of the panelists refer to here. We're headquartered right up the street in Cambridge. We're just a little over 10 years old and have about 2,000 employees now in offices here and around the globe. Akamai was founded, kind of initially grew out of some research being done by Dr. Tom Layton right here at MIT and a bunch of his graduate students. And the company was founded on the simple premise that the structure and the architecture of the internet initially, as it came together, was not ideal to deliver content from centralized locations. When I talk about content, I'm talking about things like anything you'd see on a website, video, a lot of the applications, other things that have been talked about here today. The centralization approach that kind of started with the Internet's early days led to a lot of problems with poor performance, congestion in sites that couldn't scale easily to meet demand. If you think back to the early days, I think there are a lot of folks that were convinced that www actually stood for World Wide Wait. It seems like a long time ago, but I think we all remember that. Akamai's approach to the problem was to kind of engineer and invest a way to get content more easily accessible to people in a more distributed way. So there are kind of three aspects of this. The first was to deploy a platform of servers that are at the edge of the internet, close to end users. The second was to develop sophisticated software that allowed kind of the most commonly requested content to be cached or temporarily stored on those servers. And also a method that allowed kind of easy synchronization back with the website, which is ultimately our customer, to access the content. And then the third leg is developing kind of our secret sauce, which is that a system that intelligently directs a user request for content to a particular server, rather than to that centralized choke point, if you will. Our investments over these 10 years have been significant. Today, if you look at our platform, what was once a few servers in a hall at MIT that people were plugging and unplugging to see if they actually worked is now about 70,000 servers. We are in about 1,500 locations in over 70 countries and over 1,000 networks, hundreds of cities worldwide. We have hundreds of people, R&D scientists, many of them also from this university, as well as others that are kind of working constantly to improve our technologies to kind of help improve constantly the performance, reliability, and we've heard the term quality of service, not exactly how we refer to it, it has a little bit of a different meaning, but basically the experience that the end user receives when they're getting content from an Akamai site. Today, we accelerate approximately 15 to 20% of the world's web traffic. And so if you think about things like rich media, dynamic transactions, web and IP-enabled applications, we have right now about 3,000 customers around the world, including a lot of the most well-known sites on the web, sports leagues like the NFL, NHL, entertainment sites like Hulu, Yahoo, Apple, high-tech companies, antivirus downloads, e-commerce sites, public sector financial services, kind of a lot of those. I kind of do want to make a point that we've also served along the way as a platform that has helped enable entrepreneurs and startups and people that may be in a position like Jeff to kind of play in an even playing field. And we've been able to essentially act as someone that they can outsource a operation of a complex web infrastructure to us so that people like Jeff and his developers can kind of focus on what they do the best. So I think I'd like to close by saying that in general, what we've seen from our customers, the people that provide the web content, the people that make the applications, is that they are investing and have invested dramatically over the last decade in the web. And I think it's for a couple of reasons that have been kind of mentioned here. The common standards, open protocols, the global nature of the network, the internet as a network, which I think people haven't really referred to explicitly, but I think is something that is sometimes underestimated. And I think the final point is just how quickly you can change and adapt things on the web if you're an e-commerce site, if you're an entertainment provider. I think all of those things kind of go to kind of the explosion in growth we've seen over the last few years that have really changed the way we learn or entertain, interact with each other, and transact business.
It's now time for our question and answer. I'd like to start by giving the panelists a chance to ask each other questions, starting with Commissioner Baker, if you had any questions you wanted to ask.
Sure, and don't forget that we can take questions from the audience and from the web and all that sort of stuff, because I think this is really a great learning experience for all of us, although I kind of think we all are agreeing on an awful lot of points. So I kind of want to drill down. Tim, I'm going to ask you the first question, because I think I heard you say that the government should have rules. But I think I want to ask, and this could be a question for all of you guys too, but which government? This is a global internet that we have. We have standards that have been made by, the ITF that have been guiding. We have the ITU. Now we have the Internet Governance Forum. We have ICANN. I guess, what do you think the role of government should be in the next stages of the internet here?
That's too much too general a question. And what I said was, in a way, that if government has to regulate things, it is as an exception to the way to what has been general practice. But that I wouldn't roll it out. But it all depends exactly what which things you're talking about. But for example,
I'm asking from my own standpoint, where I am in the government. Do you think that the United States government, through the FCC, should be developing rules at this point?
I think for the most fundamental ethical issues about, for example, non-discrimination on the internet, the fact that an internet supplier shouldn't, if I get an internet supplier from somebody and they shouldn't, I shouldn't find that I can get it discriminates against particular commercial people who are not their commercial partners in particular ways, or that it discriminates, for that matter, against I should get the same internet connectivity whether the color of my skin, whatever my gender is, and these are the sorts of the non-discrimination that America's got pretty used to. When it goes onto the internet, there are an awful lot of different ways in which one could discriminate. And I'd separate, I wouldn't use the term net neutrality to talk about quality of service. Okay, quality of service is something separate, and it's a complicated issue. Prepared to buy quality of service, but the term net neutrality means that you don't, my ISP isn't going to use in some underhand fashion the fact that they know so much about me and control so much how much I access in order to affect things which which ought to be independent, like like where I buy my shoes, or like which religious sites I get to, things like that. So, and if that were to happen, then I think it would be necessary to make a regulation to prevent that.
Okay, Susie.
Yeah, I have a question. So, Tim, are you saying that you would differentiate or discriminate against the term non-discrimination and quality of service? Are you saying that?
Yes.
Okay.
When I use discrimination, it's like, well, you mentioned the term net neutrality,
Yep.
and you didn't mention negative way, but I think
just
probably...
because in
right.
many of the contexts, in many of the discussions we've had with different operators, I mean, the perception is that, non-discrimination means that you basically cannot differentiate or treat bits in any differential manner.
Okay.
And so, I mean, but that's been the common understanding.
In answer to your question, I would discriminate between throwing, for example, where the discriminating, throwing away video bits because I've got a quality of service which really requires my IMing to get through, right, or vice versa. That is not
right.
a violation of net neutrality.
Okay, so I think
quality of service,
right.
I think is
I think we're in violent agreement.
I hope so.
Yes, because I think
it's very important to while the FCC is looking at where they regulate,
right.
that if quality of service is important to you, that you don't meanwhile try to block the other aspects of net neutrality, which are very important for our democracy.
Yeah, so I think we're in violent agreement in that, non-discrimination doesn't necessarily mean you cannot have quality of service, because I think hopefully everybody's getting to the point where they understand that quality of service is something you have to have in the network in order for these applications to perform, and it can be used in a highly beneficial manner to a variety of applications.
Right, but then it's a fine line, and this is why it's all difficult, in that I've tried to download a video, and the response I get is, you can't go to that site to download videos, because actually you're a cable company too. And for 20 years, we've been telling you what to watch in the evenings, and this is what's on to you tonight.
I completely agree with you. I think that, from an open standards perspective, it would really be great if maybe somebody could focus on developing open standards to enable different kinds of application and content providers to work collaboratively with network operators to be able to potentially, do quality of service for different content. It's similar, though, to a model that Akamai has, which is if you want to accelerate your content, you pay Akamai. Akamai doesn't care who you are. You're not going to discriminate between Google and YouTube or Hulu or for anybody. If somebody pays you for acceleration, because it costs you money to build out that infrastructure, that you should not discriminate between the different content providers.
Now you've slipped into something different, and Akamai certainly could sign up with Google. So that's, yeah.
I know that Barbara is waiting to get in on the discussion here, so.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of things that we really should differentiate, and I think the two of you were dancing around it in a way. The first point that I think this discussion illustrates very nicely is that there is a real need to clarify which rules should apply, because the current level of uncertainty dampens incentives to invest. And I've seen that myself when I talk to network providers. They don't do things that I think should be totally acceptable because they don't really know whether someone would raise regulatory objections. And so I think there is a really, really important role for regulation to clarify where we draw the line. And interestingly, I think the line is not quality of service, yes or no, but the question is which type of quality of service. And you know, from listening to David, I got the idea that maybe my remark about quality of service and Skype misled people to think that I didn't think that quality of service was possible in a way that actually fosters innovation. And that's where I think all these criteria that I mentioned, which foster innovation, become really important, because they give you a way to distinguish bad types of quality of service from good ones. So what might be a bad type of quality of service? If you look at DPI vendors' white papers, they don't describe the happy world that Marcus Weldon has described, or that Tim, I think, seems to be talking about. Their idea is you are the network provider, you strike deals with people. If your partner's packet comes by, you offer it a special treatment. If someone else's video, let's say, comes by, it doesn't get special treatment. So if you use all the criteria that I established, let's say distorting competition, that's an example of a way to do this that might distort competition. The other extreme is this notion, the example that you presented. We have a network that just offers different types of services. So one service might be low latency. Another one might be low jitter, that's low variability and delay. Another one could be something completely different. And then the applications, or in better terms, the users might say, at this very moment, I want to perform a job interview using Skype. For this, quality of service is really important to me, so I'll tell the network to give me low delay. Maybe then next I'm talking to my friend and I don't really care, so I'll tell the network not to give me special treatment. This is the type of quality of service that's actually available and standardized by the Internet Engineering Task Force. As Dave says, the IETF standardized a way to do quality of service that is application blind. And you know, if we had more time, I could walk you through all the criteria and show you that this way of doing it doesn't harm any of the criteria that foster application innovation, as long as the network just offers the services and the user gets to decide whether it wants to use them or not. But there are other types of quality of service, and that's so important, why it's so important to draw the line, that don't give users the choice. We have seen network operators say, well, maybe we could give like treatment, but even that's something they usually only want to do when they are forced to do so by regulation. So what does like treatment mean? It means you have to treat similar applications alike, but the network provider decides what is alike. So if a new net application comes along, the network provider might say, you are not like video. And there is this switch that needs to be switched in the network, where the network provider needs to say, oh, you know, now I think this application is actually like video. And you know, as I think Dave said, they may not always want or have time to actually do that. Whereas the other system where the network just offers these different types of services, in this other system, the new application would just say, I want this type of service, and the users, if he agreed, would then enforce that decision, and the network would provide it. So again, we take the network operator out of the equation, but still the network can benefit and offer services and get additional revenue. But it would be a mistake to think that we could say quality of service, yes or no, and that's the answer. The answer is getting a good rule that differentiates the bad discrimination from the good one, and the keywords, the key factors are the ones that were in my presentation. There was one point in your question that I want to answer very, very briefly, which is, well, can the government regulate in this network? It's an international network, and shouldn't we leave it to other international organizations? And the first answer to that is, what we are talking about right now is regulating access networks, and access networks are local, and so it's totally fine to have rules that just apply to a certain area. First point. Second point, what we are actually doing is reinforcing standards that have been standardized by the IETF, even though I would never say we want to lock a specific technology in place. But the problem is not that regulators want to mess with standards, it's that network operators deviate from these standards, driven by their private interests, and the IETF isn't a regulatory body. They standardize stuff, and then people take it or leave it. And so if Comcast decides to use DPIs and shut down BitTorrent, that's it. But there is nothing the IETF can do about that.
And I'm totally grateful, but we need to move on, so I'm going to let some other questions go.
Sure. We have a very large volume of questions, so I apologize in advance if we're not able to get to all of them. But here's one that came in from the Twitter feed. I think it's either for Marcus or Shane, and I'll leave you two to figure out which one wants to take first crack at it. Isn't the convergence of internet revenue per user and cost per user expected if there is competition?
Do you want to go first on that one?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so I want to comment on, which we'll get to the answer on that, but I'll be brief. One of the things we've talked about discriminating packets. The part that is a new area of openness and work is actually the protocols to be able to talk to the elements that discriminate the packets. That is now becoming increasingly standard. So now any application in principle can actually tell the network to mark the packets in a certain way. And even more than that protocol, open APIs are appearing in various standards for where you can now, as an application provider, I'll give an example, France Telecom has an SMS open API. So if you as an application provider want to send a text message, I can now send a text message over Orange's network, which is France Telecom's brand, using their open API, using RESTful web methods. So I can send a request to FT to send a text message for me. And that's another level of openness that is appearing. So I think we need to be clear that there are new areas of openness in the network that allow any application, and this was your concern. You thought I was saying there was a menu of applications that the user had to scroll down to find the one they liked, and if it was low down in the menu, they'd never find it. No, I'm saying actually there are open APIs where they can say, this is my favorite application, and that application itself requests the QoS that they're looking for. So in other words, there is no discrimination in that methodology. So now, to the question. The question was, do they naturally converge when there's competition between so network cost and application?
Well, actually, I think the person was asking, isn't that normal for a marketplace that your costs would equal your revenues? I think that's the gist of the question.
Yes, so the costs shouldn't equal revenues ever, right? And that's a very bad world to live in. Costs need to be a certain fraction of revenues. The problem is that costs are going up exponentially and network costs aren't coming down exponentially. And revenues have stayed flat because of some expectation on the part of end users about they get it all for nothing, the all-you-can-eat methodology. And it's just not even serving them that well anymore because now that's why we're getting network congestion. So yes, historically it worked well enough because we really were in a web surfing realm, and now we're in a perfect storm of application growth, and bandwidth growth, we're all now moving to HD and 3D, and mobile phones and laptops, et cetera, all connected to the web at all times. So that perfect storm means that actually the bandwidth growth can't be matched by the capacity growth, and so flat revenue in that paradigm doesn't work anymore. That's the basic point. But if we have this model where the users get to actually, through open APIs and interfaces, request the treatment they're looking for, then no harm is done to anyone. And of course, we apply non-discrimination to prevent kind of legal infringement of rights of the individual. But in addition to that, they can offer this capability to say, this is the service you want, you can have it. And you can pay whatever you like for it, depending on the quality of service criteria. So long answer, but it answered part of the previous question. But yes, it's not natural that costs equal revenues. That's very bad. And in fact, ideally, what you need is just a stable environment where costs match the revenue potential, but scaled by that. And that's what I'm arguing for.
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments. First of all, what Marcus just said in theory is absolutely correct. You don't observe revenue equaling cost in any industry with high fixed costs, because you have to find some way to cover those fixed costs. So that's not what happened. Second of all, I actually don't agree with Marcus's forecast. So that's so in some sense I don't agree with the premise of the question, and I'll be very direct about it. Revenues for internet access in the United States have been growing constantly over the last few years, and I expect to continue to grow. Revenues for advertising supported internet content have been growing, and frankly I expect them to continue to grow because they're going to cannibalize offline activity. Do I expect the value chain in landline telephony to be growing? No. I actually expect revenues in that part of the network to be declining over the next few years, and that's going to generate some partial crisis. But in part, when I look at this industry, and I look at the access industry, I don't see a constant or flat revenue growth, and I don't expect that for any time soon. And just the economics and the value creation that's going on aren't going to generate that in the near future.
As a fair moderator, is anyone who hasn't been responded yet wanting to say something? No? Okay.
We don't have a half hour.
Yeah. Well, we have yeah. Let's do. Okay.
I just wanted to add one quick thing about quantifying this internet growth. In mobile data services, mobile data growth in 2008 grew by 1,000%. Revenue for mobile data only grew by 20%. So there's a huge gap between usage growth and the revenue that they're
I have a feeling Barbara has a different opinion, so let's hear what she has to respond.
I just wanted to say I think it's going to be really important to look at this data in the sense that I think there is a big distinction between data growth on wireline networks and wireless networks. The wireline network, as far as I know, in the US and Canada grows about 50 to 60% a year. That's based the estimate of the MINS project at the Minnesota University, and that Andrew Litzko does the Cisco Visual Networking Index project and telegeography. And that would be a growth rate that given the current decline in costs, doesn't mean that even if traffic grows in that rate, costs don't increase because costs decrease enough. Overall costs don't increase because the per unit costs decrease enough, 33% a year, to make up for this revenue growth. You want to look at that, Andrew Litzko made a submission to the Canadian regulator with lots of data on that. Mobile seems to be very different. His data says it's 100% per year. So I don't know, there might be, but what I'm trying to say is we need to look at this data carefully and don't just accept the assumption that, oh, data is growing, costs are increasing, so that's a real problem. The second thing that I think we should really consider is that part of the problem here is that as usage increases, people don't pay more. And I think that would be a very easy way to get more revenue by coming up with things like the usage tiers that people talked about. And I think you can do that in a way that's very beneficial for users.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to comment on where the data comes from. For a start, decline of network costs 33% a year is not correct. We sell equipment. And equipment is the fastest declining part, right? Because there are others are labor-intensive pieces, like operational costs, which requires IT people, or labor costs of building networks. And those things don't decline at all, typically, right? They tend to increase. So looking at the equipment part, which is the part that actually does decrease over time, that generally goes down. There's an initial phase of a new technology that's fast, but the steady state decline is about 10% a year. That's associated with any IP Ethernet technology. Yes, there's the first year where it goes down quickly, but on average, it's about 10% a year. So if we say that's the decline rate, and in our model, are very sophisticated models of the decline, and then we see the growth of 30% a year, I'll take that number, or I'll take 60% a year, you can see the mismatch. And so that's a basic point. In selling equipment, we know what the price looks like year over year. And that's roughly the model. There is a first-year hiatus where your new technology quickly commoditizes like your DVD players. That certainly is a phenomenon, but after that, it's about 10% decline year over year.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions from the audience and from the Twitter feed about packet inspection, deep packet inspection, whether network operators should be allowed to do it, not allowed to do it, could there be benefits for innovation, investment, and congestion management, effects on users and privacy. So if anyone has thoughts on networks and packet inspection.
I actually am quite familiar with deep packet inspection technologies. Most people use
Susie, would you maybe just say like 30 seconds about what it is for the people?
Sure. Deep packet inspection technologies are basically devices that sit in the network that look at the data traffic and identify what kind of applications are actually on the network. And most operators do use these technologies just to be able to monitor and see what kinds of applications are on their network and what the usage patterns are across these applications. And pretty much all the operators that I know of use this just from a monitoring perspective, because sometimes they will have network problems, network outages, congestion issues, and sometimes they don't know what's causing it, and they use these types of devices to see, okay, a new peer-to-peer application just came out and this neighborhood is using it extensively. Okay, that's what's causing my congestion. I think some of the operators that we've talked to abroad have actually started to look at using these technologies to enable subscribers to actually pick and choose which of these applications are actually running on their network for their service and which ones they may actually choose to prioritize. So there's some interesting usage of these types of technology from a subscriber choice perspective that some of the other countries are starting to undertake.
Great. Tim, I think you had it.
Yeah. Well, deep packet inspection is a powerful technology, and I suspect, yes, certainly for diagnostics, it would be very important. And also, I imagine, if you really want to pursue organized crime, then probably using deep packet inspection is going to be a really powerful tool of a government. If you this is serious. The people need, if you really want to use the network to find out about people, and you have a piece of the government that will do it that you trust. The piece of the piece that I came across was the case that I came across in the UK was when deep packet inspection was used by a company called Form, who attached to British Telecom survivors. They watched they monitored the users. They looked at every click. They looked at every HTTP GET and recorded the URIs that the user had clicked on. And they looked at all the text which came back from the web page that the users in the household were looking at, and used that to characterize the users. And they used that to provide a very detailed profile of the user, and their business model was that they would then use that to do targeted advertising. They didn't announce, the trial was not announced to the users. It happened. It was a secret trial, so they got in trouble for that. But then people realized that actually and my concern is that if you, so you can use DPI, there's obviously a huge commercial value to that information. And that the technology exists. My worry is that once the technology exists, then unless we're very careful, because of the huge commercial value of getting a complete profile of everything that somebody has been reading, everything that a household has been reading, and the ability to completely change the way you deal with them as a company, and whether you want to deal with business with them, for example, as an insurance company, will be very dangerous, because that information, once it's available, it can be stolen, it can be bought. That I think that one of the things that people assume at the moment is that when they're wondering, is they're making one of those life choices, like about cancer, or like about being gay, or like about when they're wondering that, which religion to pick up, or just looking into something that really they wouldn't, anything that they really wouldn't want to know other people were doing. Applying to Harvard, they assume that click will, as they do it, they assume that their choice of university is something between them and the internet somehow.
But Tim,
and that they know,
But Tim, Google also does the same thing. Google also collects all the information, so it's not just using DPI technologies, right?
There's another end of the scale where when I'm going to a single website, like a clothes store, I'm very happy for them to keep information about me, because it's much more efficient when they know if they remember what size I take, because it's much more efficient than me trying to remember what size I take, or most of the people I know.
No, but Google is the search engine,
right? Now, there's a lot of discussion at the moment, which I think is a bit separate from whether Google has. A lot of people are asking about whether Google is too big and it has too much power, because it has such a monopoly over such services, and potentially a monopoly over
well, they have tremendous
areas.
Amounts of information about a subscriber, but they don't necessarily know who the subscriber is, but there's a user ID attached to that particular user. So they know about a user ID, and they know about all of the information associated with that user ID. Maybe they don't have the address where you live, but they know who you are.
That is a separate issue.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
so maybe
I have a relevant question that sort of might kind of bring some of this back together. And I'm going to go with Jeff, because you haven't been able to speak yet. Okay, and I'm going to combine, I've got several questions on transparency and several questions on mobile internet ecosystem. So first of all, and this can be, everyone can pick up afterwards, after Jeff, and maybe Dave. But first, could effective transparency policies implemented by the Commission, which goes to the DPI, could they solve some of these concerns? And the second is, in the mobile internet in ecosystem, are there factors that might call for different rules of network management? Or can things like your compression technologies overcome some of these differences?
So that's a big question. I'll try to be very fast.
I know.
I do think that network management on mobile it's more constrained environment, absolutely, and the Commission should certainly take that into account. And just because of spectrum limits and the difficulty of locating towers, it's just very slow to add capacity to the mobile network. So I agree with Marcus in that we have a bandwidth crunch. That said, what I'm asking for is that as an entrepreneur, that there be rules of non-discrimination in the way that we definitely have to attack that network management. And there's a lot of, although I don't understand all of the QoS proposals here, I must admit, I think there's a lot of opportunity for abuse if they're not regulated properly. If I don't care about gaming, then I shouldn't, I as a user will want the application that I happen to be using now. Right? So I don't know how many users are actually going to ask for bad quality service while they're using something. I mean, this is a very sort of voluntary ethos. So I would prefer to see fair, non-discriminatory tiers. If you want to use more data and you want a better network connection, that's fine to charge more. That's non-discriminatory. It won't bias competition. It won't bias free speech. The complexity of APIs, if I'm, a user or an application developer to have to interact with some tariff by the minute or something for latency. I mean, it's all very complex. If the ISPs need more money, charge more and weed out unlawful behavior, charge more to the hogs, that's fine. But don't start discriminating between one application or another. If you pay more for video, but one actor decides that my application isn't the right kind of video, the abuse potential is huge. So I really ask the Commission to look at non-discrimination in network management, not to stop network management, but to ensure free access. And some of the proposals here are so complex, they open up a lot of room for abuse. As to your question about will transparency help? Yes. Adequate notice if you're going to close a port or if you're going to block a certain kind of protocol, which isn't post facto notice, but is actually adequate notice 60, 90 days at a minimum for consumers and application developers of how you're going to handle congestion from a technology standpoint. Right now, it is totally obscure, and that clearly biases against small companies that don't have big staffs or access to that information. Does that answer your question.
Should we take a break? I think at this point we'll take a 5-minute break because I think we're going to have a second discussant panel. So let's thank our panelists. And then we'll start again at 7. Great, we have a second panel with 4 more discussants. So what we're going to do is have 5 minutes of comments again, and then take some more questions from the audience and the Twitter feed. We're going to start with Ajay Agarwal, who's a managing director at Bain Capital Ventures here in Boston. He focuses on early-stage mobile, internet, and software investments. Prior to Bain, Ajay was an executive at Trilogy Software, a privately held software company in Austin, and was also a consultant in LA with McKinsey & Company. Ajay.
Thank you very much. And I apologize in advance. I have a dinner tonight that I've got to get to, so I'm going to sneak out here a bit early. But appreciate being invited to this panel and being part of this discussion. I'm an investor with Bain Capital Ventures. We invest heavily in early-stage technology companies across the ecosystem. Obviously, most of our companies today depend on the internet and leverage the internet in some way, shape, or fashion. And so, these issues we're talking about today are obviously very germane to how we think about investing and how we think about putting money to work behind innovation. I thought I would talk about a couple quick stories here just for 2 minutes. And I think the mobile internet that Jeff Skyfire talked about earlier is just an instructive case study of seeing how going from a system that's very closed to a system that is not quite totally open, but it's getting there, and the kind of innovation that's unleashed. And the story I want to tell is about a portfolio company called Skyhook Wireless that essentially provides a capability for determining precise location of a device, particularly in indoor locations where GPS does not work. And if you think about it from a perspective of an investor, 5 years ago, if we were funding an application company, for example, a company that was trying to provide mobile safety, we knew that one of the risks was that company had to go to each of the major carriers in the United States. They had to spend 2 to 3 years negotiating with those carriers to get a deal in order to get access to some kind of location API from each of those carriers, just so they could then build their application and take that to market. And so from an investor standpoint, that adds tremendous risk. It adds tens of millions of dollars of additional cost, and it certainly is the reason why the amount of dollars flowing into the mobile ecosystem, particularly on the application side, as opposed to the infrastructure side, has been very low relative to the dollars flowing into the consumer internet space over the last decade. Now you fast forward to the last 2 years with the advent of the iPhone, and I agree with Jeff. The iPhone is not totally open, but certainly a huge leap forward relative to where we are. And the iPhone has Skyhook's location capability built in. So every time you click that little button on the phone and it zooms into the part of the map where you are, that's Skyhook's technology at work. Now, Apple provides that capability to any application provider in their app store. And what you've seen not only is an explosion in the number of apps in the Apple App Store, I think 150,000 applications, but literally somewhere between 20 and 30% of those applications use the location capability. And the kind of things that have come out of it are absolutely amazing. So Yelp has an application where you can point the camera's viewfinder at a particular street, and they will provide what's called augmented reality. They'll provide the reviews and star ratings and so forth of the particular stores and restaurants overlaid right on your field of view on that iPhone. Incredibly powerful technology that could not be possible before without location. You've got Urban Spoon where you can shake your phone and it recommends a restaurant nearby to you, and on and on and on. And what's interesting, if you look at location on the iPhone today, literally in the United States, iPhone users are pinging their location 200 million times a day. And that story, I think, is just a great case study from the perspective of an investor, how an ecosystem that's open unleashes innovation. And I think as mobile internet becomes more and more open, you're going to see increased investment from the venture capital community. The one last thing I'll say, just to wrap up here, is clearly, as it relates to regulation, that's a risk we factor into any investment decision. The more threat there is of regulatory uncertainty, the more that gives us pause around putting dollars to work. So clearly, certainty and clarity around regulation, obviously openness and an open playing field and a level playing field are, from our standpoint, absolutely critical to continue fostering innovation.
Great, thank you, AJ. Our next speaker is Nabil Hayat. Mr. Hayat is founder and CEO of Conduit Labs, who are a music and gaming company based here in Boston. They have over 1 million players and relationships with over 1,000 bands. Previously, he was COO and VP of product development at Ambient Devices, and he's also been COO and CMOO at Team Talk, a new media sports company.
Hi. Thanks a lot for asking me to be here. And as gaming has come up a couple of times over the previous couple of panels, so I hope to speak to that just a little bit in the couple of minutes I have. I actually really like to start from the very first presentation where Barbara used a word that I use a lot, which is crazy. And really, they're really crazy is a great substitutional word for innovation. And there's really two types of innovation that I think we're talking about. We're not talking about that are affected by net neutrality. We're not talking about generalized innovation, a situation where you have a slightly better eBay or a slightly better battery. We're talking about, I think, two types. One is disruptive innovation, and that is the very small number of innovations which actually pose a threat to other parties. And as we think about neutrality and as we think about the idea of who the actor is who's making these decisions, we have to think about how important disruptive innovation is to the overall economy and ensuring that it can still occur. The second, which is just as important, is what I call toys. And I happen to play in games right now, but I think many innovations that seem almost entirely flippant at first. And I happen to have helped start a company called Ambient Devices, which was actually a spin out from the MIT Media Lab where we're speaking from today. And we had to deal initially with talking to mobile carriers. And so, this has come up a couple of times because it is such a great and perfect example. What Jeffrey is trying to do with Skyfire is something that we had some experience with, banging our heads up against trying to explain something, a new device and a new use on the mobile networks that, quite frankly, was easy to explain and put in somebody's living room and get into Wired magazine and get Oprah to talk about, but was something that a leader of a mobile telecommunications company did not fathom at all and thought was a ridiculous use of their network. And we had meeting after meeting that was very much like this and ended up having to go a very different direction at that business, specifically because there was a small set of gatekeepers sitting in a very large room that were trying to make these decisions. And I, in fact, at this point, would no matter how good the idea was, based on the current environment, I would not start a mobile company. No matter what. Unless the environment, fundamentally changed. So, a more cogent example on the consumer internet is how dismissive most investors, in fact, and certainly plenty of other of my peers were with services like Twitter or Facebook a couple of years when they first came up. It's very hard ahead of time to figure out how important these services might be later on. Despite that, I'm running a game company right now, which happens to use an awful lot of network bandwidth, and so I actually should fall on the opposite side of this argument. I could make an easy argument right now to some type of internet service provider that I should have a preferential service because people will pay more per kilobit for the services that I'm offering than they will for most video, for instance. Unfortunately, I kind of would refuse to drop on that side because I think I may start a company again in the future. And And so for me, at the end of the day, anything but neutrality ends with either a small menu of services, the kind of I can pick that I like Skype situation, and in that situation, of course, crazy just doesn't happen. Either kinds of crazy just doesn't happen. And the second is that there is no preference, no specific small room. It just ends up being something that a company can pick, and that boils down to ostensibly a tax on small business. It's if you want to play with YouTube and there's no preference, then everyone needs to pay in order to play. And so for me, I think about the fact that the next business I may start may indeed be, in fact, crazy. And so I'd like to, advocate for an environment in which that business could hopefully exist.
Super. Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Tykson. Amy is President, CEO, and Chairman of Bend Broadband, which is an Oregon-based cable TV, internet, and VoIP provider. Amy's taken the company to the forefront of broadband technologies, launching high-speed data in '97, digital cable in '99, and high definition and video on demand in 2004. She was also drove the first HSPA Plus deployment in the United States last year. Amy.
Thank you. So I guess I'm the only one that's really operating one of these ISPs. So I'm speaking for a lot of my brethren out there, but we operate a small cable, family-owned cable operation in Central Oregon. We have about 200 employees, and we've been in the internet business since '97. We were the first in Oregon to offer high speed, as Paul mentioned. I think it's interesting listening to the various comments because for us, really, the bottom line is customer satisfaction. I mean, we are working day and night to make sure that our customers are getting what they pay for, that they're satisfied with our services, and we're making our investments in accordance with that. And so with that comment, I guess I have three major concerns about the direction or the inquiry about network neutrality, additional network neutrality or regulation. And the first one is, and I have to agree with Commissioner Baker at the outset, which is it broken? I think the light hand regulation that we've been operating under has really fueled innovation and investment, unbelievably so, over the past decade in particular. And so the idea that something is broken, I'm not sure quite what that is yet. And I get very worried when the government starts to perhaps get involved in an industry that's awfully changing awfully fast from a technology standpoint. And how do we ever catch up? Whatever target we set for regulation will probably be a miss. And then what have we done? We've ended up probably creating more problems than we had from the get-go. The other one has to do with the ecosystem, and the ecosystem continues to blur. I mean, we look at application providers, content providers, and the ISP, really in that triangle. And I think it was Marcus that was talking about that in his diagram. But when you look at what's happened with search just in the past, let's say, 5 years, and how search can influence where people go on the web and what they do on the web, I think that we have, it's not just the ISP that is directing traffic, let's say, in the worst case scenario here that's been pointed out, and there's 2 examples of that happening over the past 5 years, I might add. And then the third is that ISPs really have to be allowed to manage their networks to preserve and enhance the customer experience. That's what it's all about. The application and ways of using the internet are rapidly changing, and we have to have the flexibility to adapt and implement new tools to solve the congestion problems as they occur. So what really has me worried is that the idea that we would be deploying unnecessary rules that would impact our ability to deploy technology, make the investments in our cable operation, and would increase our costs with burdensome requirements as a small operator, and then finally to insert the likelihood of ongoing and drawn-out litigation over whatever the terms and rules end up being. So light hand regulation has enabled us to move fast, and that nimbleness has fueled our investment, and it's provided a very important competitive advantage for our company. We use about 4 tools to manage our network now. We have, of course, capacity expansion, node splits, usage billing, and then traffic management during points of congestion. And I think as we move forward with more and more heavy bandwidth using applications, we're going to need to have, there will be other tools that will emerge that we don't even haven't even considered yet, or that haven't even been discovered. But we need to have the flexibility to experiment with those and find ways to make sure that we're satisfying our customers and we're meeting their needs. Thank you.
Great, Amy. Thank you. Our final discussant is Professor Christopher Yu. Christopher is a professor of law and communications at UPenn Law School, and he's also director of the Center for Technology, Innovation and Competition there. His research focuses largely on how economic theories of imperfect competition are transforming internet and telecom regulation, and he's been a leading voice in the debate about net neutrality. Professor Yu.
Thank you. One of the things that's always struck me about this debate is that it really is framed by what I think of as a mid-1990s conception of how people use the internet, where the number of users was relatively small and uniform, when the number of applications they were running was fairly small and uniform in terms of the mostly TCP/IP-based, download-oriented. The networking technologies tended to be wireline, and in fact, the business relationships were relatively simple. I'm not going to talk about the last one, it's in my other work. It overlooks how much things have changed and that the current architecture may no longer be appropriate, and I want to talk about some of the pressures. First, let's start off with the users. The fact that they're more heterogeneous means if everyone wanted the same thing from the network, you create one network optimized in one way. As what people want differs, you naturally expect the market to spread out and respond by differentiating it, what the services they offer, because if people want different things, you want that to happen. But what's interesting to me, that's all something I've discussed in front of the FCC and other forums as well. There's a different thing that's happening, which is I think that the market that Shane is right to emphasize maturation. There's some evidence that the market may be at a maturity. And there's a classic product life cycle where something goes through an initial growth stage, high innovation, high growth, matures and flattens out. And the question is, what's happening with the internet? Well, if you look at data about internet usage, what you start to see in the total percentage of internet usage in the US, we're pretty clearly hitting saturation right now about well above 70%, depending on which data source you use. And even if you start to look at just broadband, you start to see that inflection point where we're starting to see things flatten out a little bit. So what does that mean? According to the theory, when you start to hit the flat stage, the nature of competition fundamentally changes. When you're in the growth stage, you have a very simple, uniform product, and you try to grab new users who are uncommitted and relatively easy to get. Once you hit the saturation stage, the way you're going to grow is not by getting new users with a general product, it's by delivering higher value to the users that are already in the market. And if that's the case, what does that mean? It means you have to manage costs more carefully, and it means you have to offer new value to these services, which means you're going to offer increasingly specialized equipment to provide it and increasingly specialized products to serve them. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is something that's often overlooked is the number of technologists that actually believe that the internet is locked into an obsolete technology and cannot evolve to a new technology. I mean, I can cite you a dozen papers by leading engineers who raised this concern. And I started puzzling about why that was the case. And one of the reasons is, one of the things they talk about in the management literature is something called design hierarchies, where naturally, if there's a big installed base, there's going to be some natural inertia. But when you have multiple layers where you have 30,000 autonomous systems horizontally divided, but in addition, you have a certain division of it vertically, it's very good at facilitating competition within the existing framework of people who don't have to break up the layers. What it's very bad at is facilitating a different kind of innovation which requires a different stack of the layers. And what they say is that, in fact, when you have a hierarchical situation like this, you'll tend to get stuck in what may well be an obsolete technology. And there's been a lot of initiatives, Genie, Fine, Newark, and Clean Slate are all trying to find ways to evolve to a new platform. And I think those are concerns that have to be taken seriously. What's also interesting, the applications have completely changed from a download-oriented world where you only cared about when the last bit arrived, to things like interactive video where you care about every single bit in the stream. And in fact, if you think about it, most of it's being conveyed by UDP, which does not is not responsive to the traditional ways we've managed congestion, which was TCP-based and acknowledgement-based, and that, in fact, this is all still a content-oriented world. We may be talking about a world where it's really about apps. I also hear in a lot of the debate, prioritization is talked about as if it's some bug instead of a feature. It's been in the IP header since the very beginning. There have been repeated efforts, whether it's IntServ, DistServ, MPLS, and now LEDBAT, which is not enhanced service, but it's worse than best efforts routing. And in fact, there's a lot of economic obstacles and technological obstacles that the people are trying to figure out. The other thing that's often ignored is the extent to which the growth in capacity has been leveraging legacy investments. We're changing from a world where we had about a $500 per subscriber bill to get cable modem and DSL up into worlds where Fios, they estimate $4,000 to $8,000 a subscriber. And wireless is obviously much more expensive. And so at this point, I think that carriers are looking for ways to find ways to build more bandwidth using OpEx instead of CapEx in a world where CapEx has become hard to come by. And in fact, wireless broadband has very different qualities, limits to bandwidth, much less reliable, subject to local congestion, and the devices don't have end-to-end visibility. In fact, we have a much different array of devices out there, and that, in fact, this is the most innovative and competitive part of the network, and it's the most uncertain. My last slide, what would I say? We should expect things to change. In fact, Shane has said in his work that competition among standards is a sign of innovative health, and that, in fact, we should not necessarily rule out OpEx instead of CapEx-oriented solutions off the table, that, in fact, the current architecture may be inhibiting certain innovation. People concede mobility, multi-homing, multicasting. There's a lot of things the current internet does not do well at all. Some problems are solved at the network level. The debate over active queue management is a good old historic example. A good modern one is botnet detection, different things of security, which we're now going in the network because that's where the information is aggregated. And then the last thing that's really interesting to me is that, in fact, technologists vehemently disagree over whether prioritization is good or whether we should do over-provisioning. And it strikes me when then there's no consensus in the engineering committee, that's exactly the kind of time where a regulator shouldn't come in, and because that's where you have the disputes. And the concern is that decisions won't be made by users or innovators, but it'll be made by regulators or the shadow regulation over people operating in the space. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to try and end on time, so we have about 10 minutes. So what we'll do is maybe one very quick, if any of the panelists have comments on each other, and then Commissioner Baker, and we'll ask a couple of questions from the audience in the Twitter feed, and then we'll adjourn. Barbara.
So I would like to react to Chris, and the first thing that really strikes me is that you say the current architecture of the internet isn't great, and it may even inhibit innovation. I didn't hear anybody today say we need to keep the current architecture of the internet. What I did hear, and that was definitely the point I was trying to make, that there are certain factors that foster innovation. And in trying to evolve the internet, I would be very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so the idea is that you have these factors, and they give you a framework in which the network can evolve. And of course, the underlying assumption here, and we can debate that, is that network providers' private interests, which are, make profits, that's perfectly legitimate in a capitalist economy, aren't necessarily equivalent to the interests of society, which are much broader and involve things like free speech and innovation, things like that.
So maybe I'll ask Amy to respond. Amy, as someone who's actually building networks and innovating out there, or if you would like to say maybe a word about this point. But just sort of innovation in networks and incentives for doing that.
Well, I think when you look back at the '96 Cable Act and what happened with that, and then the advent of DOCSIS, that really was the fueling of our network infrastructure for the cable industry anyway in the United States and now internationally. So innovation is happening in the network, and it's really happening to I guess, improve the experience for the customer and make sure that the costs are low. I mean, those standards that were set for DOCSIS really made the cable modem service affordable. Devices are available for, I don't know what, $29 or something like that now at retail. And so that investment continues within the cable architecture relative to node splitting and DOCSIS 3.0, which has more properties to provide a better quality of service for our customers at the end of the network.
Professor.
I'll respond with 3 concrete examples of kinds of innovation that may get forestalled by certain kinds of non-discrimination regulation. There is a small ISP in Britain called PlusNet, which uses DPI to segregate traffic into 8 different classes and give them different levels of priority depending on the time of day. They are award-winning in terms of customer satisfaction. They're award-winning in terms of customer service. There's an ambiguity as to whether the kinds of prioritization they do would be permissible under a current regulatory regime. There's 2 counterexamples. I've heard today something I thought was very encouraging. Tiered pricing is okay. When Time Warner attempted to do this about a year ago, a large amount of the NGO community on the network neutrality proponent side opposed it, and they had to back down. Canadian ISP attempted to charge a surcharge for VoIP, all VoIP services. Again, forced to back down based on that. And it's an interesting thing. That might not happen under the current rules, but these are the kinds of innovations that different ISPs have attempted to do that may or may not hold up under certain regimes.
If I could comment, because we have deployed usage billing and Bend, and we've had a very good result. We were experiencing about a 25% increase in our bandwidth consumption in 2008. We used a lot of, so we were really at a crossroads of determining whether to increase the prices for all customers, or 1% of our customers at that point were using 29% of our bandwidth. So it was really a problem. So either do we implement consumption billing, a program for that, or do we raise the prices for everyone? And so that was really our strategy, was to do that. So we set our usage allowance at 100 gigabytes per month, and as a result, that user group, that 1%, is using about 8% of the bandwidth. Our peak usage has gone down from 25% at peak to 7% at peak, and we have a great experience for our customers. We've been able to hold our prices, and the extra cost of capacity expansion and node splits and so forth continues to be reinvested in the network. So for us, it's been a very important tool. It's not, however, the end-all be-all. We need other tools, and we need the flexibility to use those in terms of network management.
Great, thank you. Jeff.
Well, I think, as several of the commissioner members said today, there's a lot of agreement on this panel, and I think the usage pricing may be a very acceptable way, as long as it's non-discriminatory, to deal with the very real bandwidth crisis. I mean, Cisco told me that a couple hundred users in Germany were over 40% of the network bandwidth, and a lot of them were doing unattractive things. But I think it's there's nothing wrong with having a very simple, pro either by the hour or by the minute or by the bandwidth or for the month, pro version versus a standard version for everyone else, and that may create a market that is actually normalizing some of these abuses. There are few people really do take down the network, and but as an innovator, I'm very concerned about some of the other ideas expressed, which do sound more like discrimination. I'm not sure that VoIP packets should be treated differently than other applications. I think that's opening the door to a very slippery slope to discrimination. Bandwidth is bandwidth. And you should be able to pay more as a user if you want less latency and a fatter pipe by the hour, by the minute, or whatever. And there should be some differentiation. But and there's nothing wrong with a gaming ISP opening up that has premium pricing for low latency and the like. The rules should be clarified to allow stuff like that. What's going on now, though, that does require regulation is mobile is not covered by net neutrality, and there are a lot of nefarious practices which aren't transparent, and there's a lot of potential for abuse and discrimination against new entrants. So some of these ideas are excellent, and I think as an application developer, everyone should be so thankful for the billions of dollars that are being spent by internet access providers to provide the fantastic internet that we have, and to the mobile handset innovators who are creating these great new platforms. The government interest should be very light regulation just to prevent abuse of anti-competitive behavior and discriminatory behavior. And I think we could probably have a high degree of agreement on that.
I just want to add one point. You sound surprised that the public interest community was up in arms at Time Warner's proposal. the reason wasn't that they were trying to introduce usage caps. The reason was the way in which they were structured, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think they were structured in a way that it would become very unattractive for people to cancel their cable subscription and only use the internet, because they wouldn't really enable people to consume the amount of bandwidth they would have to use for to watch television over the internet. And so I think there are ways to structure usage tiers in ways that are, give users the incentives that are similar to a flat rate. I could talk more about it, but I'll just stop. But I think it's not just usage tiers. You have to do it in a certain way. But if you do them right, I am very sure that many people and most of the public interest community will be totally in favor of that.
So I'd like to comment. It sounds like a lot of the panel is scared to innovate more freely, in the sense that usage tiers feel comfortable because it looks like just twice what you do today. Real innovation is actually allowing greater degrees of freedom than that, where I don't have to buy an hour's worth if in fact my application only lasts a second, or 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, or it lasts 15 minutes. I should be able to actually innovate, and an application or innovator should be allowed to only request the bandwidth they need for the duration of the application, as long as it's done in an open way, which is back to this idea of an open API. You can request what you need when you need it, and no more than that. And that's actually the potential for maximum innovation, as opposed to this kind of step function, let everyone have twice the bandwidth, which actually isn't optimum. Everyone can understand that, because you've reserved now an amount of bandwidth the user didn't need, and that clearly is not optimal for any type of network, particularly mobile networks, which, as we've all said, are spectrum and bandwidth constrained. So I think we shouldn't be afraid of maximum innovation. We say we like maximum innovation, but and then we say cautious things like maybe just double the service tier. That's
Can I just comment on, can I just clarify really quickly? What Marcus is suggesting maybe deserves a lot of examination, but let's be clear, when we discussed it, as he clarified the idea to me offline, that the applications may well pay the ISPs for faster transmit through this open API. And so if we're ready, well, you said users, or maybe YouTube or some other application could pay extra for this premium transit if the user didn't want to pay, or maybe an advertiser could pay. So the point is, we are opening a world where the publishers and the application developers now can start to pay quietly for better service, and that will favor the rich. That will favor rich companies.
So Barbara, hold on. So I think Shane has been very patient. So Shane first, and then Nabil, and then I think Commissioner Baker. One at a time. I have to prioritize this panel. It's very.
Why do Chris and I have had an ongoing conversation about whether the internet's mature. It was fun to have my words sent back at me, I have to admit. Why do we argue about this? So I'll take the case that it's not mature yet, and tell you why I think that's really important for an FCC commissioner to understand. Okay, so let me go right to that. I don't think it's mature for some obvious reasons. One is the advertising industry is not done being disintermediated. The magazine industry is not done being disintermediated either, nor is the newspaper industry. It's going to be painful. It's going to save a lot of money. That's a source of economic growth. It's also going to disintermediate the film industry. I'm sorry for all my friends in that industry, but it's going to save money, and that's going to generate a lot of economic growth. But frankly, I don't think that's really the key piece of economic growth that we're going to see. The one that we're going to see that's really big for productivity gain is the one that's really hard to see, and that's in enterprise IT. When I do field work in enterprises and I see what they're doing with the internet today, when they're combining the various services that are being offered by the people here, by using wireline internet at high speeds, by using wireless internet in various uses that nobody had thought about 10 years ago, and you put those together in ways nobody had thought about. It's incredibly complicated what they're putting together, but my goodness, are firms doing things that were just never before possible, and the productivity advances are going to be massive. That's economic growth. So when I look at that, I say, what contributes to that? What is it in the access part of the network where the FCC has some leverage that can contribute to that? First of all, the most important thing the FCC can do, nobody has said here today, so I'll just say it, more spectrum. Period. All right. Okay. That's just release more spectrum. That's just way more important than almost anything else we've always said here today. Because it will get used, okay, and for some productivity uses you just can't imagine. The second thing is why I always come back to transparency and consistency, because what you are observing I don't think is mature yet. It's really complicated, and what the firms are putting together involves sort of information problems from a management standpoint that are just extraordinarily difficult. And if the network itself is extraordinarily difficult to manage your way through, then it prevents firms from doing some of the product things that we would like them to see, and particularly in the enterprise where we're pushing boundaries now. I mean, we really are pushing them on the global level. It's amazing. And so, simplifying things by actually requiring everybody to make clear what their rules are, when they're changing them, and what they look like, and how it operates, I actually think it's going to help the user community and the application community a lot. So that's kind of where Chris and I, we've had this conversation for a while in private, but I thought I'd bring it publicly out.
Great, thank you. Nabil.
So the previous discussion was very interesting because I think we started to get into a much more finer point about what we mean by net neutrality. And I think the fundamental question is just, has something changed about the way that people might be able to monitor the internet? And as the kind of the previous set of panelists talked about, that is it's true. Like there's something that has changed, and the question is whether that requires regulation. And the specific discussion is, can you or should we allow discrimination at the application layer? And I think anything that take Marcus' point. I agree that I might be able to pay for a slightly higher Skype service, but anything that gets away from a user directly paying and allowing any other party to get involved in the application layer discrimination is way too much more ripe for abuse than it is benefit to the overall economy. And I think there's a very cogent example of where that conflict exists based on where corporate entities are today. We talk about these ISPs as if they're only ISPs, and they're not, right? So Marx's earlier model was, hey, if their revenues increase, then they put in typically 15 to 20% of capex into the overall bandwidth, so our bandwidth goes up, everyone's internet gets faster. That's awesome. What happens in a situation where they also own, a content provider like NBC, and how does that affect where their 15 to 20% of capex goes, and then what does that do to the overall internet?
Or like you were saying with, say, Google owns Google Maps, and so what happens in search with MapQuest then? At the bottom of the list, doesn't pop up. I mean, it's not just the ISP manipulating potentially, and the ISPs aren't manipulating anything, but well, they're not. I mean, there's two examples of this. I just wanted to make that point because the ecosystem is really blurring. As you move away from the edge, I'm calling myself on the edge. I'm a provider on the edge. Yeah. But then you move up into the ecosystem to search and so forth. So really it takes all of these providers, all of the stakeholders to work together to solve it.
Very quickly. We could have a whole another day or two on Google, right? Like I think it is, especially for somebody who has built his entire career and life around innovation. I completely agree with the general point, right? Yeah. Today, I just want to ensure that we are ensuring the most amount of potential innovation in this particular category, right? Great. And then, we can have one other day or two on Google.
Chris, I think you got the last word on this.
So if you look at other electronic communications industries, what we've seen is sometimes content providers get paid, sometimes users get paid. It goes all different directions. You've seen this in broadcast television where they used to pay the last mile provider, the content providers. Now it's going the other way. And I don't see, it's a classic, what an economist would say, a two-sided market. And in fact, payments should change across time in context and go all different directions. The other point I would like to make is a really concrete one, is the difference between FiOS and UVerse. FiOS costs $23 billion, gives you 100 megabytes of bandwidth, allows a great triple play, 4,000, 8,000 a subscriber. AT&T made a different play, leverage the existing architecture, do VDSL. Cost $7 billion. What do? The only way they can do the triple play is to reserve bandwidth for a single application, video, from a single provider, them. And they're able to do that. Now that falls into the scope of managed and specialized services, but in a way, it's the ultimate discriminatory on an application, on a source-based solution that saves $18 billion in CapEx. And so this is the tough question that I think we see as we're looking at a build-out of 100, conservatively, people talk about build-outs of the homes. If it's 4,000 to 8,000 to subscriber, you do the math about how much this is going to cost. The stimulus package puts $7 billion on the table. We got a lot more to go to get the kind of internet we're going to look for. And this is one of the decisions we're facing in this process.
Let me just say, on January 19th, we're going to host another workshop focusing, this is a good segue, on what information consumers and technology developers need to promote consumer choice and control of the online experience. It'll be streamed also on openinternet.gov. So seeing as we're a little bit out of time, let me thank all our panelists and discussants, this panel and the previous one too, if you would join me. And also thank you all for coming.